Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Sommelier of Sci-Fi, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. And this is Robservations episode number 375, and I am robcasting at you from the Robservatory, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. And I have to say, I was looking for topics. I was looking for topics. There was really the entertainment news services haven't really been updated with anything. There's a few things here and there, but really not much. I don't really know what to say. I didn't know what to say. I was looking for something to discuss. I mean, I'm sort of, to be honest, Picarded out. I'm sure everyone's Picarded out when it comes to listening to me talk. But I figured, why not do just an open mic, a ask me anything, whatever questions you guys send in, whatever you want to do. I got some letters to share. And I figured rather than do a topic, I would just do an AMA, one of those things, because why not? I'm sure everybody has, interesting questions. You guys, you imagination connoisseurs, always have something interesting to say. So I will be observing and reporting on you guys. So yeah, it's kind of nice. It's kind of quiet. I mean, LA is a different kind of a place. I've just been sort of renovating the Robservatory here, which is always fun. There's so much crap that I have in this place. A lot of it I would love to get rid of, to be honest. To sort of thin down the herd, as it were. But yeah, and working on these, of course, special features for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray. It was very funny. I talked to Dave Parker just before I went on. He is also working on Hills Run Red special features. I'm doing the retrospective production special features that were shot during production, and he's doing new stuff with new interviews that he conducted and he's producing. And we're supposed to deliver this week, so which we're going to do. That's the lead time. The disc is supposed to come out on June 16th, so we are working toward that. Once we deliver all of our special features, then they can finalize the disc and get it into replication. Who knows if it'll come out on time? I don't know. I have no knowledge of any of that. I see, once again, I have some weird old man dry flyaway with my hair when I put my headphones on. Just, not that it really matters, but it just kind of looked funny. And I guess I do have to be a vain. Yeah, that didn't really help. Anyway, so, yeah, I want to thank everybody who tuned in last night and watched Whining About Movies with Elizabeth. Views, episode number 7. We talked about Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. Wong Kar-wai is absolutely one of my favorite directors. As I was saying last night, I didn't know who Wong Kar-wai was. I wasn't familiar with his work until in the mid-90s. One of the things Quentin Tarantino did for a while was he used his clout to start Rolling Thunder distribution, and he brought like Switchblade Sisters, and he brought Chungking Express, which was at the time Wong Kar-wai's latest film. And I saw that film, and I was just knocked out by it. And it doesn't have explosions or anything, and it's about life in Hong Kong, but there's just a romantic sensuality to his work, and Christopher Doyle's cinematography, and when they team up together. Christopher Doyle did not shoot In the Mood for Love, but it's the same kind of thing, and his take on life. And then watching Chungking Express led me back to things like Ashes of Time, but mostly Days of Being Wild, Chungking Express, and also its companion film Fallen Angels, Happy Together. Just some great stuff. And of course, when he was making In the Mood for Love, he was also making a film that came out after that, which was 2049, which I don't think is entirely as successful as In the Mood for Love, but I still love Wong Kar-wai, and he most recently released The Grand Master, his version of the Ip Man story, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, I don't quite know what we're going to watch next. I was going to watch Sion Sono's Love Exposure, but it is 4 hours long. And Yeah, I don't know. Might be a little too much. Little too much. So yeah, and of course, the first question that has been sent in to me today is from our man Calvin Bose, and Calvin Bose from Portland, along with Roberto Suarez. Calvin says, have you noticed a show called Picard ignored the main character so much that they forgot to use his most famous catchphrase, "Make it so"? How could they not use it? Didn't Girardi say it? Did Girardi say "Make it so"? Look, here I was not going to talk about Picard because I'm Picarded out. But my first question, of course, from you guys is in fact a Picard question. So why would I not answer that? Yeah, I think that the greatest, my feeling, a lot of people have been telling me, well, ultimately at the end of the show, the scenes with Data and Picard becoming a synth is really what it's all about. And I'm like, well, is it? I don't know. I feel that the greatest failing of Star Trek Picard was it did tell what could have been an interesting story if it was strictly about Picard. I mean, if they were doing this show about a man like Picard dealing with his mortality and ultimately leading up to this choice about whether or not he would, it was the same choice that was offered to Kirk in What Are Little Girls Made Of, which, Michael Chabon now jokes about on his own Reddit or his own Instagram AMAs about Picard. And I feel that there could have been a really compelling, really interesting story about when if you're facing your mortality and you have the opportunity through technology to be granted immortality, would you take it? I mean, that to me is such a compelling science fiction story. And then, on a parallel track, we had the best scene to me in the whole show was between Data and Picard. And I feel that if the first episode had opened with that moment where it was Data who chose to finally be that his consciousness is living in this quantum simulation or whatever, and it was Data, a man who was finite and artificial, who's telling Picard to finally pull the plug on him, that in dying, in facing non-existence, he will finally achieve his own humanity, the finite nature of life, and that's what makes it worth living. If the show had begun with that, and then Picard had gone on this path and examined, all of those things, examined like the Borg. The Borg were half synthetic, and they could be replaced, and by reclaiming Borg, there's ethical questions that what happens. They're finite. They're no longer part of the collective. What does that have to do with synthetic life, which can replace biological life? The revolt on Mars, it turned out to be obviously engineered by the Zat-Vash or whatever, but there was a really interesting kernel of a personal science fiction story that could have been all about Picard, but then they were trying to turn it into whatever it was. They gave it these ancient prophecies and the Romulans and the Zat-Vash and all this stuff that had really nothing to do with Picard. Nothing to do with Picard. And I as I watched and pondered now and read people's comments, and there's been a lot of really critical reviews in the press about the show, it seems like even more of a missed opportunity, because at the end, the choice that Picard makes, it's made for him, but if that was a choice that was in the offing the whole time, that what if it was, Bruce, the character of Bruce Maddox that is a MacGuffin for the first part of the season, is really completely abandoned. And it would have been interesting if it was Maddox that had reached out to Picard. They could have taken all the elements that were in the show, and obviously the showrunners were replaced halfway through the season, and there are these really interesting elements that were there, but they were they just didn't work. They just didn't gel, and I found that to be the greatest disappointment, because there were so many interesting ideas that were just breezed over. But anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, Calvin, but it certainly was something that I've been thinking about. And I think that's the difference between, it speaks to, I'm always talking about authorship, and that's what I want from a story is I want the author to take me on a journey where certain questions are posed. The storyline is an examination of various you're looking at whatever the central questions of the story are from different perspectives, and by the end, the story has made a decision, and the story has presented an argument and offers you through the character's journey sort of a paper, like a thesis paper that delves into whatever it is that the subject matter was supposed to be. And I felt that we never got that with Picard. There were so many roads that we went down that led nowhere, and nothing held together. But ultimately, like you were saying, Calvin, the story really wasn't about Picard. Some stuff happened to him, but it was all external. You're watching this, and then it just devolved into gobbledygook with the super synths and prophecies and the Romulans, and none of it made not one lick of sense. But, what are you going to do? Willow sends in a tip and says, Next Generation's Eye of the Beholder just made me think of a verse from Eminem's song, Kim. So now it's double homicide and suicide with... Oh, wait. It just jumped away. And suicide with no note. I personally think the Buffy episode, I Only Have Eyes for You, which had a similar premise, was much better. Yeah, you're talking about, I believe, the 7th season episode where a crewman has dived into that energy beam. Yeah, I don't think that was a very good episode. The 7th season of Next Generation, all good things notwithstanding, there's a couple of good episodes. I think, like, I thought the Pegasus was pretty good. Was Pegasus 7th season? It's hard to say sometimes. But it was clearly they were bringing back people's relatives, and the 7th season of Next Generation is not great. And you're probably right. Off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with the Buffy episode. I'm sure I've seen it. I mean, I've watched all of Buffy. I just don't remember I've Only Have Eyes for You. I don't know the Buffy episodes by name, by episode title, only other things like Hush. I remember that stuff, but I would imagine probably so. I think Buffy is a terrific series. I love Buffy. One of the most horrible high-definition restorations, if not the worst high-definition restoration ever done. I hope if Disney Plus ever puts Buffy up on the series, although I doubt they would, but they might. If they ever do, it desperately needs somebody to go in and remaster those episodes again. I hope somebody does it at some point. James Hoffman sends in a tip and says, if you could write and produce your own Star Trek TV series, what would it be about? Would it be a prequel or a sequel to TNG? Thanks. Well, as many people know, you can find it online. I've talked about this before, but back in 2005, when I was working on Superman Returns, I went to Seattle with Bryan Singer, and at the time, that's where Christopher McQuarrie, who's now directing the Mission Impossible movies, was living, and the three of us went to dinner. We had a long sake-filled sushi, a long sushi-soaked sake, a sushi dinner that was sake-soaked. That's what I want to say. And I had brought up the idea that since Enterprise had gone off the air, that the three of us should team up and come up with a new Star Trek series. And they were down with it at the time, the more sake we drank. And I'm like, Chris, you got to write it. Brian would direct the pilot, and the three of us could, direct episodes or whatever. And over that course of dinner, we came up with sort of this idea that it would take place 1,000 years in the future at a time when it wasn't going to be dystopian, but it was a time when the Federation was just old and everybody had changed. Like the Romulans and the Vulcans had reunified, and they were busy sort of building their society. The Klingons had become like Tang Dynasty warrior mystics, and they were expanding their empire, not necessarily through conquest, but they had a lot more to offer other species, and they were almost completely transformed. It's almost as if they went through an entire reformation. The Bajorans were content to be they were more communal with the wormhole aliens, their prophets. And the Cardassians their society had become much more artistic, and they less militaristic. The Ferengi had spread out all across the cosmos. Everything was just different. And the Federation was no longer, everything had sort of calmed down, and the galaxy had become more introspective. But the Federation they were a peacekeeping force, and they were spread out all over the place, but they weren't the vibrant institution they used to be, and Starfleet wasn't everybody was too spread out. They weren't building starships anymore, and it was just old. Everybody had been, and for hundreds of years, it had sort of not devolved, but everybody had sort of become serene, complacent, and there was still problems, and the Federation dealt with that, but it was more like, a police force taking care of local problems, and then a new external force from outside the galaxy seemed to have come to the Milky Way, and the Federation was going to build a new starship, which was going to be a new enterprise that was going to sort of relaunch a new commitment to, and the Federation spanned the whole Milky Way galaxy, was going to once again try and bring the Federation back from its creaky oldness. And that's where, and what did it mean? What did the Federation mean? And I was thinking, like, what if Rome, instead of becoming decadent, was just old? And how could we sort of find our spark again? Like in City Slickers, finding your smile. So that's kind of how I envisioned the show. And I told that to Jeffrey Thorne, who is a TV writer now, and he's written a number of Star Trek novels, including Titan Star Trek novels. And he wrote up, based on these ideas, our pitch document. And I wrote an introduction to that document, and then there was some ideas that I got from Mike Akuda, and then Mike Akuda created a logo for me, and the series was going to be called Star Trek Federation. And the overarching idea behind it was, how do you put the Federation back? How do you achieve its luster? And this document's been out there. You can find it. I mean, if you do a cursory Google search, it's out on the web. But I find it interesting that this starship, the Discovery, goes 1,000 years into the future. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but it was a pretty singular. And also, people have pointed out to me that, well, that's kind of like the premise of Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, although Andromeda was I thought more dystopian. This was something else. I mean, basically the premise to me was, and I guess, I mean, we came up with this idea 15 years ago, but as I was getting older and life was going on, I've never understood this idea of retiring, and I've never understood like wanting to stop. And it was more like, okay, when you hit middle age, how do you reinvent your life and make it vibrant again? Why is this idea that in our golden years we want to wind down? And I look at my heroes, like filmmaking heroes like Ridley Scott and Martin Scorsese. I mean, they're not going anywhere. Ridley Scott's making The Last Duel right now. Scorsese just came out with The Irishman. Clint Eastwood is going to celebrate his 90th birthday in May, along with me. I'm not 90, but my birthday is May 15th. And I look at those guys and I'm like, well, that's the way you want to be. You want to continually be relevant, and you want to be. By the way, I did leave the door open today to allow the dogs in. Look who's here. Who's going to get up here? Because everybody wants to see you. You want cookies? Somebody wants cookies. I know I haven't been letting you in. So yes, Gilbert and Tallulah are here today. They like that we're here. Okay, who's gonna come up? Anyway, there you go, buddy. Oh, I got both. Oh, yes. Look at the giant Muppet dogs. You guys got to get haircuts, and we have to brush you. Look at you. Yes. Would you like another cookie? Oh yeah. Oh. Do you not want a cookie? I'll give you another cookie, buddy. You want a cookie? They love these organic cookies. They're from Castor and Pollock's organic cookies for dogs. These are chicken recipe. You only get two, dude. You get two at a time. That's it. That's it. Come on, get Tallulah, come back up. Tallulah, come here. Oh, she can't get up because of you, Gilly. Here you go, buddy. Here, dude. Oh, dude. Yes. Okay, now you guys got to get down. Good boy. All right, Tallulah. Good girl. So there. Oh, what? Oh, watch out. You okay? Nope. She's a drama queen. Oh, you are a drama queen, but don't punch. Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you're so pretty. Look at you, you pretty Irish redhead. Oh, that's right. That's right. I got to talk. We're live. We're on YouTube. All right, so there you go. There's your dose of Tallulah and Gilbert. Everyone's like, oh, you're not going to let them on the show anymore. But there they are. On a day like this, when we're all socially distanced, we don't have to be socially distanced from our pooches. So Gilbert and Tallulah are here. So let's see. I got more. Hang on. Let me switch here. So James, that was sort of my idea for a Star Trek show. I loved Star Trek continuity. It's part of my fandom. I mean, I've always loved the various, I've got all the reference manuals and technical manuals and blueprints and all that. And that was all part of what I thought was really fun. I mean, here we finally got a new glimpse of a Starfleet ship, and there's no hero shot you couldn't even see the ships. And that was sort of a bummer, but okay. But I think that ultimately the idea of how do you reinvent yourself, how do you make yourself relevant when you might be played out, and that was sort of the underlying thesis of what I wanted to do, was how does the Federation make itself relevant again after being around for literally centuries, and it wasn't. It wasn't cool anymore. It had lost its luster. And that's what I wanted to explore in my... And of course, through an action-adventure prism of Star Trek. And I thought that would be, a very good thing to do. So, yep, that was it. That was my idea. Now, it was very interesting... the other day, because I read my comments, I read the comments on the show, and there was a pretty interesting review. I got a comment on one of my shows. Somebody wrote in all caps. Somebody named Statler and Waldorf or something, and it was very funny. I got this you middle-aged virgin talking about childhood stuff on the web. Why do you keep doing that? I'm just like, okay, whatever, dude. But it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I think I've been able to keep myself engaged by doing these shows and talking about geeky stuff. I mean, you can't want to make movies and not be interested in all of this stuff, to keep yourself, whatever it is you're interested in. I mean, look at Shatner's a sports fan. He's an equestrian, and he's 89 years old, and he's still doing the things that he's been interested in. And I guess I could be studying Spinoza or something at my age, instead of talking about science fiction stuff. But I still do love all this stuff. I haven't given it up since I was a kid. It's just sort of evolved into different things. But yeah, I'm glad it hasn't gone away. But that was my idea for the Star Trek show. So that's a long-winded answer. Kaz Graphics sends in a super chat and says, "Hello, Rob. A movie I think is great is Killing Zoe with Eric Stoltz. Any thoughts?" I saw Killing Zoe. I like Killing Zoe. I want to say that's Roger Avery, isn't it? Is Killing Zoe Roger Avery? Let me check. I just want to make sure. If it is, yes, it's Roger Avery, and I liked it. And I only saw it once, though. I'm a big fan of Eric Stoltz. I mean, he really hasn't done much lately, but I was a big fan, of the John Hughes movies. I think my favorite John Hughes movie, I mean, everyone says, oh, The Breakfast Club. I think mine is Some Kind of Wonderful, that Howard Deutsch directed. I love that movie, and he's great. He's terrific, I think, as the lead in that. He was great in Pulp Fiction, obviously, and I know famously he was replaced in Back to the Future by by our boy. But I think that Eric Stoltz, I wish he was in a movie called Lionheart. I wish he had got more work, and maybe he'll have a reinvention of his career. Who knows? But yes, I'm a big fan. Big fan. On Killing Zoe, I should go see that again. You know, that's a good one. I should look that up. I should see that again. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and said, I saw DS9 episode Explorers today. It's a great example of how to do representation. It also had at the start of Bashir and O'Brien's friendship, which is the best example of friendship in Star Trek. I think so too. I love the drunk singing. It reminded me of our Friday drinking game here. What is your Friday drinking game here? Explorers is a really great episode. That's the one. Is Explorers with the Bajoran sailing ship? I think it is, and that Jake and Ben Cisco builds. I like that a lot. They actually, Eagle Moss made a I think it's that. Hang on, let me make sure. Of course, it didn't pop right up. I just want to make sure. Well, I think so. Yes, it is. Cisco builds the replica of the ancient Bajoran ship. I love that. I think that was a fine episode. You know, and what a lovely episode of Star Trek that was. I mean, it truly celebrated, like you said, friendship, and a friendship between Bashir and O'Brien, and then the friendship between a father and a son. And in terms of representation, what a great episode of Star Trek too. And you know, you wonder what happened to that. Why couldn't you do something like that? I mean, it's a great episode. Swag props, our man Cal. How you doing, Cal? Cal, you know, still right here. I love having the things you've made. This is, of course, Swag props is Rorschach's journal. I keep showing this. The only reason I don't have the Book of the Nine Gates is because it's right over there. But this I keep. If you haven't gone to Swag props, he's an old school imagination connoisseur. If you haven't gone and seen his Etsy store, I highly recommend going to his Etsy store and looking at his books. Swag props, the books that Cal makes are replicas of books that appear in movies, like Henry Jones's Grail Diary from Last Crusade. And when I first saw that he made the Nine Gates of the Kingdom of Heaven from the Roman Polanski, Johnny Depp film The Ninth Gate, I freaked out that there was somebody else in the world that loved that movie as much as I did, and loved it enough to make a replica book. So Swack says, from season 2, the show should be renamed Star Trek Gollum. Then the synthetic being may have Picard's memory engrams turning in its circuits, but he wouldn't have Picard's soul. It's not the same as a Katra. Well, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. I find it very interesting that they were calling him a golem, because obviously a golem, from, I guess you want to say, Yiddish folktales, is a artificial man, a creature made of clay that is created to protect the Jews. So why would you call him that? Why was it called the Golem? Why do we know it as that? I mean, I know Michael Chabon, I'm sure that's what he decided to call it, but there are larger ramifications there that I found. Again, the whole idea of him becoming a synth, and if it was the only way that he could have, I mean, he could have saved the universe from the super synth race that was coming through that portal by becoming a synth himself. So it would have been it might have been Picard made this sacrifice himself, but he didn't. It was he was inadvertently put there, and his sacrifice, well, it didn't mean anything. But what if he had to do it? And it was the only way that he could have appealed to whatever it was that was coming through that portal, which was sort of kind of lame, but it didn't. Journey's End asks if I have any Star Trek audiobook recommendations. I have to tell you, I don't listen to audiobooks because I read so much. I just don't. And I know everyone tells me that I should listen to audiobooks, but I don't. I don't listen to Star Trek audiobooks. I can make you Star Trek book recommendations, and those, if they've been put into audiobooks. I think I've said this before. Now, when I say best Star Trek books, these are books that I think both are appealing from a Star Trek fan perspective, but also as great science fiction. And Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens' Federation, which is a story about, well, two generations meeting, which is far better. You'll read the book and go, wow, this is steeped in Star Trek mythology and history and lore, and it's a much better book, better story than what we got in Generations. It's also, it'd be really difficult to turn into a movie. But the Reeves Stevens Star Trek books, Federation and Prime Directive, two of my very favorite Star Trek books. Also, they did books. They did 10 books with William Shatner, where he came up with the ideas and the stories, and then they wrote the novels. The first three, The Ashes of Eden, The Return, and Preserver, the Odyssey trilogy, those three are outstanding, and I would highly recommend those. David Mack is one of my favorite Star Trek novelists. He wrote a Mirror Universe duology, 2 Mirror Universe books that I highly recommend. He also wrote a trilogy of books called Star Trek Destiny, the Destiny trilogy, that are amazing. And he also wrote a trilogy, The Cold Equations. I don't know what the name of the overall trilogy is, but the Cold Equations trilogy is really good. Peter David has written some great Star Trek novels like Imzadi and Vendetta and Q Squared, which I really liked. There's so many. I should make a list and put it on the Burnettwork website of my favorite Star Trek novels in no particular order. I was a big fan, I'll tell you, of a early pocket release that it's just a fun romp. It's not normally the kind of Star Trek book I like, but I like. It's called Black Fire, where Spock basically becomes a space pirate, and it's by Sonny Cooper. I really like that. I remember really liking a book called The 3-Minute Universe, a Star Trek novel called The 3-Minute Universe. I don't remember who wrote that. There's a lot, though, but I don't know if any of those are in audiobook form. I do not know. Brian McGovern sends in a super chat and says, will you ever do a top 10 scores you own? Well, hang on. You know what? I got to put my glasses on. Will you ever do a top 10 scores you own in any format like you used to do with your movie collection? I'm curious to know what scores you own. My favorite is Passion by Peter Gabriel. That's a score for Passion of the Christ. That's an amazing, amazing score. I also love Peter Gabriel's score, although some of it was taken from other material that he did for Birdie, for Alan Parker's film Birdie. Passion of the Christ is one of the great scores. I mean, I have a lot of scores that I love. I mean, there are scores that I love that aren't necessarily from the best movies in the world. I love John Williams' score for Jaws 2. Jaws is good, but the Jaws 2 score, I don't know why. I just think it's a lovely score. Jerry Goldsmith's score to Capricorn 1 is a favorite score of mine. It's a decade old now, but Rachel Portman's score to Never Let Me Go, the Mark Romanek film Never Let Me Go, is amazing. The score for obviously Amelie, but God, there's so many scores that I have. I couldn't even begin to score. That's a tough one. You know, I really like Christopher Young's Hellraiser score. The score for Hellraiser, I think, is terrific. Of course, I love the Lisa Gerrard Hans Zimmer score for Gladiator, just off the top of my head. If you want to hear Eric Korngold's score for King's Road, there's a lot of Star Wars in that score. That's a great score. I was just listening to that the other day. So yeah, there's so many. I should do that. I've got to excavate over there. My scores are over there. They're behind. They're behind a giant Italian Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan poster, which is also over there, but it isn't hanging on the wall. So yes, I could do that. Anonymous sends in a tip and goes, "Hey Rob, I'm a huge fan of collecting figures and comics. Would you ever consider doing a video on some of the figures and comics you have?" You know, I did do a Hot Toys video that's on the Burnettwork. And now it's old. I did it I want to say 3 years ago. I did it for the 100th episode of Heroes, Collider Heroes. But you can watch it. I'm still pretty proud of it. I think it's a pretty fun video. It didn't cover all of my collection, but when it comes to figures, mostly I'm only really 12-inch figures now. I do have some 1/12 scale, the those figures, the Mezco figures. Like I've been getting anything that's a movie related figure that's sort of odd, like they put out an Alex from Clockwork Orange I had to get. They had a Dawn of the Dead 2-pack, Diabolic I had to get. That Warriors box set, I had to get that. So yeah, I got that. But yeah, I would love to do that. I should do that. But in terms of comics, mostly I like my omnibuses. I was just watching one of my favorite channels on YouTube is Gem Mint's channels. I don't know him, but he did a video that he just put up of his whole man cave room, and it's beautiful. He has like every Marvel omnibus, and it's for me, as a man cave goes, it's very tasteful. It looks like we use the same digital lights, but I'm a huge fan of his channel, and I have a lot of omnibuses, but I don't have nearly the collection he has. And I've only bought omnibuses. I don't buy every omnibus. Like I buy the ones I'm interested in, but I don't have all of them. But yeah, I should do that. I mean, I'll do I think with this we're quarantined out in LA till April 19th, and by the end of that quarantine, I want to have this entire place up and running. I'm actually even moving my surround sound system in here. I'll do. My friend Dave Hargrove wants me to do like a Playboy After Dark here in the Robservatory, where like every Friday night I would just have people come and we'd have like a live party, like the old Playboy After Dark show. And I'd just have people come up and we'd hang out in here. And you could eavesdrop on conversations. I don't know about the technology I would need to do that, but it would be pretty funny. Maybe I will do that. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, there is joy in repetition. By the way, Mukbang, Joy in Repetition is one of my all-time favorite Prince songs. He used to frequent this club down at Bond 36. I love Joy in Repetition. That song is off of Graffiti Bridge, and I have to tell you, I think I saw Prince live around 30 times in my life, and he never played Joy in Repetition at any show I was ever at. And on the One Night Alone box set, they do a version of it on there. This just blistering rendition of Joy in Repetition. I love that song so much. There's Joy in Repetition, so I'll ask the same questions I've asked before. What are your was your Octavia Butler interview any good? Will you release this tape? Thanks for broadcasting during chaos and disorder. Well, you're welcome. For those of you who don't know, I was producing the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's a 4-disc special DVD special edition, and I think this stuff, a lot of it wound up on the Blu-ray. But my company was producing that, and I had a team of people working. And one of the things that I had pitched to Disney that we were working on, which they in the middle of all this work, we were 14 months into this job, Disney inexplicably pulled the plug. I don't know why, but I found out later. Nothing to do with us. But one of the things that I had pitched was before Chronicles of Narnia came out, I wanted to create a primer disc, like a Narnia primer. And it was going to be 3 parts. It was going to have a 3D interactive map that you could go all over of Narnia and a timeline of where everything was happening. And then we were going to have an extended preview of the making of the movie, because my team was in New Zealand. We were there for 14 months shooting all the behind the scenes, and we were going to do like a 30-minute look at the behind the scenes. And then the other thing that we were doing, that we were in the middle of production on, was a documentary about authors that had been influenced by C.S. Lewis's work. And we had already interviewed Octavia Butler. We had interviewed Terry Brooks, the writer of the Shatner books. We had interviewed Clive Barker. And we were traveling literally around the country getting all of these authors and putting this stuff together. And when Disney pulled the plug on our involvement in the project, and if you look at that disc, there's no credits on it, nothing. They used all of our footage, I have all the emails, and they were telling me this is the greatest behind the scenes footage we've ever seen. And they just that disc, it was going to be like a point of purchase disc. You'd buy it like for $4.99, and it was going to be to support the the release of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which they hope to be a series of films like Lord of the Rings. I mean, obviously they made Prince Caspian and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but it was unfortunate, and they just never went through with that disc. They decided not to do it. And I was working on it. My company was working on it with another company that was doing the interactive map, and it was a huge disc with a big budget. I think the budget of the project was $350,000. And you'd be able to, when the movie came out, they would sell it at movie theaters, and you could buy it as a point of purchase thing, sort of at Best Buy or anything. It was going to be really cool. So Disney has all of that footage. It's never been used. It's never wound up on anything. It probably will never be used. I mean, one of the things that is really frustrating, so I don't know, I watched the interview once, and it's really sad that it's just like, are we ever going to see it? I don't know. I do not know. And probably not. I mean, it's been languishing away in a vault for 16 years. And as far as I know, it was the last interview Octavia Butler gave before her death. Octavia Butler is she's a black female science fiction writer, and she's one of the great science fiction writers. And apparently she went out on her front stoop and she slipped and fell, and I think that's how she died. And we did the last interview with her, and it's never been put out. And it's a bummer, a total bummer. But so Disney, I'm happy to go back in. I would love to make that documentary. I don't know if Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are these movies up on Disney Plus. It would be great to go finish those special features and put them up. I mean, I would do that. It'd be great. Joy and Repetition, good call on that, man. What a great Prince song that is. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, "What's up, Rob? I appreciate you working hard daily to deliver your shows to YouTube. So to further support, I became an actual website member." Wow. Well, thank you. I forgot you can actually do that. I didn't, you know what? It's interesting. You joined up my website on the Burnettwork.net. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Lastly, for all the comic fans stuck at home, I suggest the underrated Savage Dragon as well as Madman. You know, both Madman and the Savage Dragon are great. I got the Savage Dragon, the omnibus hardcover, absolute edition right down over there. I love Savage Dragon. Eric Larson, you know, he's been putting that book out consistently for almost 30 years now. That's amazing. Savage Dragon's great. I think it's great. So yeah, and Madman, Mike Allred, Madman is the work of a madman. I love Madman. It's so good. So good. Good. Those are very good, Nick. Those are very good recommendations. Troy sends in a tip. Oops, sorry, Troy. Have considered releasing Robservations as an audio-only podcast? Yes. And you know what I'm going to do? I keep saying this. I will be dropping the first Robservations podcast with a video component, but it is going to be finally my interview with Star Trek novelist Diane Duane, who also wrote early on some of my very favorite Star Trek novels, such as The Wounded Sky, her Rihansu books, Romulan books such as My Enemy, My Ally, Doctor's Orders. She wrote Star Trek comics for DC, and she's written a lot of other fantasy series as well. I did a great interview with her like a year and a half ago that I've never released, and I'm going to release it on the channel in the next couple days, and it's going to be the first Robservations audio only. It'll be the first audio podcast. So yes, I am going to do that and make Robservations available. People keep asking me, and I am definitely thankful for you guys, because I want to. You write, I love to be able to work while listening to your dulcet rants. Well, as long as you like my dulcet rants, okay. I appreciate that. Mark C. sends in a super chat and says, I sent you a letter about comics this morning. You may not have it yet. Sorry if it's a little polarizing. I love polarizing letters. I can't wait to read it. Mike Bodden is passing on some letters. I don't know if I'm going to get them before the show is over. He says I might. And if I do, I'll read them. You know, I've got time. So I can't wait to read your polarizing letter. Reichelt Music sends in a super chat. I want to thank you for that, Reichelt Music. I very much appreciate the support of the channel. Jashan Cater sends in a super chat and says, I was watching Blade Runner 2049 again, and wow, I love Blade Runner 2049. It was funny, I was talking to Brian Fuller, and I've talked about this before, but he's not that big of a fan of Blade Runner 2049. He has some really he has some really interesting thoughts on it. But yeah. I love Blade Runner 2049. I've got the vinyl right over there. The vinyl that Mondo released. It's pretty dope. I love that score. That score is so good. Jashan goes on to say, thoughts on the music done for Mad Max Fury Road. Okay. Junkie XL's score for Fury Road rules. And one of my favorite pieces of driving music that you can drive or ski really fast to is the Doof Warriors theme, or the piece that he plays. It's so, I love that score so much. It's the perfect score to listen to blaring loudly as you drive the LA freeways. It's outstanding. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Swack Props sends in a tip and says, here's a question the late James Lipton would ask his guests on Inside the Actor's Studio. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt? You know, well, obviously I would love to have, I wish I had gone into either, I would like to have gone into the military, to be honest. I would love to have had a career like, my friend Mike was a special forces medic, but I wouldn't have minded a military profession, and I've always secretly wanted to be a police detective. Just because I look, I understand you could wind up like Detective Somerset in Seven, like Morgan Freeman's character. He like clearly he lived his city, the detective, the city that the Mills and Somerset were working in was literally the Hieronymus Bosch Hell on Earth city, which I get. But I've always been fascinated by that, and if I could have had a military career that's sort of, I had some segue into law enforcement or something, I and then did something else. But I think that would have been, I would have enjoyed that. I would have enjoyed the kind of military discipline. I would have liked to have some kind of thing like that. I think I would have enjoyed doing that, maybe, and I would have, being a politician in Washington, being part of a think tank, something like that. I know that seems kind of strange, but I love all that stuff. I'm always fascinated by the workings of government. Maybe not necessarily a politician, but it would have been some kind of foreign service. I think I would have enjoyed. Yeah. So that's what I probably would have told the late, great James Lipton. Ron the Good Boy sends in a super chat and says, as an avid moviegoer, I'm going through withdrawal. Help. Well, I'd invite you over. I have plenty of movies to watch. Or you can watch our show, Whining About Movies. I do with my girlfriend Elizabeth, where we share a bottle of wine and we watch a movie. Last night we did Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. And we also did Jean-Jacques Benex's Betty Blue, which I love. This is actually the second sight Betty Blue that has the theatrical version and the director's cut on the 91 director's cut on Blu-ray. And this is the company that's putting out Dawn of the Dead, and I cannot wait. It's probably my most eagerly awaited physical media set ever. I never thought the day would come that I would be more excited or less excited to get an entire 4K 27-disc box set of the Star Wars films. Rather than, I want Dawn of the Dead more. I'm not going to not get that Star Wars box. I pre-ordered it whenever. I don't even know when they put it up for pre-order. But, it's supposed to come out this week. I don't know if it will. You got to call up Best Buy and go, hey, do you have my box set? And you drive up and they'll bring it to you or something. But, yeah, crazy. But, yeah, as an avid goer, look, man, I feel your pain. I miss going to the movie theater. I haven't been there in a while, and I guess I won't be going there for a while, but I do miss movies. Miss them a lot. But catch up. If you are an avid moviegoer, do things like go to the AFI list of the top 100 movies and start at 100 and work your way down. You will have seen a lot of those movies, but start watching movies that you haven't seen. I know that I've come to understand that a lot of movie fans now that I interact with, do not have a lot of the classics under their belt. And if you go to the AFI Top 100 movies, start watching those. Watch 1 or 2 a day and see where that takes you. I think that could be really interesting for you. Try it. Or if you don't want to do that, pick a genre like film noir and the 10 best film noir movies or the 10 best westerns, or a genre you're unfamiliar with, musicals, biopics. Play little mental games with yourself and broaden your cinematic horizons at the same time. I think that would be pretty cool. Andrew Advent sends in a super chat and says, given the choice, would you run a Sutra spinoff? Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely run a Sutra spinoff. But I think it would be really interesting to deal with a show about synths and those kinds of questions. I mean, imagine Blade Runner from the replicant's perspective. Think about that. And not if the replicants were going to kill people, but it would really, I think it could be really interesting. What would they be doing? What would they be exploring? I mean, if you guys aren't watching Alex Garland's Devs, the 5th episode, I think the show is only 7 episodes long, but it's really, really interesting. I mean, it started out as a conspiracy thriller kind of a thing, but watching where it's going, the 5th episode sort of it changed for me. I really liked it. And Girardi's in it. And it's really fascinating stuff. But I think doing a show about synthetics grappling with the bigger questions of life, immortality, or what happens, look, they have set up a situation in the Star Trek universe now that they can't get away from, which is there is a galaxy-spanning synth or super synth life forms that are bent on destroying all organic life in the universe. They've added that to the Star Wars. I didn't ask them to do it, but they did it. And I don't think anyone asked them to do it, but that would be sort of interesting, is delving into that aspect of what they've done. And yeah, so I would do a Sutra spinoff. I would. Jason S. says, do you read any comics digitally? Any recommendations on a decent tablet where you can read a digital comic page in full size? Jason, the only comic that I've ever read digitally was Doomsday Clock. And that's it. I've never read comics digitally. I'm old school. I like the comics. Now I buy, omnibuses and things, but I don't read comics digitally, which I apologize for. I do not. So I don't know. But I'm a Mac guy, so I'd probably get a Mac, Mac Air or something, or an iPad. But I don't know how that works. I don't know. Somebody else. I am not qualified to answer that question. Mark C. sends in a super chat and says, another amazing super score by Jerry Goldsmith is the one from Medicine Man. It's sweeping, beautiful, and melodic. One of the best he's ever done. I was never... John McTiernan directed Medicine Man. Sean Connery and Lorraine Bracco. I was never a fan of that movie, but that doesn't mean there's a lot of movies that Goldsmith wrote great scores for that I don't think people would consider great films. Kingsport Tool Review sends in a super chat and says, did you watch the premiere of The Vagrant Queen? I didn't. I did not. I don't know what that is. So yeah, I don't know. Let me jump into a letter here because it's a good one. And it comes from, who do you think it comes from, ladies and gentlemen? That's right, Willow Yang. Willow Yang sends in a letter, and it's all about the coronavirus. And it's actually really, really interesting. So, once again, this comes from Willow Yang. You're going to love this, you guys. This is a great letter. Dear Rob, my apologies for once again going off topic from the regular Post-Geek Singularity fare, but with work being largely shut off right now, I've been doing a bit of research to gain a better understanding of the culprit that's responsible for the unpleasant set of circumstances we all find ourselves in. I just thought that I might take the opportunity to share some facts that I've come across. Now, Willow Yang is a molecular biologist and a PhD candidate she's looking to get her doctorate. She has already been published. She's a published writer in a medical journal. So the fact that she writes to us like this it's a treat and a privilege. So Willow, I thank you. Coronavirus versus SARS-CoV-2 versus COVID-19. There's a bit of confusion regarding the terminology that's being used, and I have to admit I've been guilty of misusing the terms myself. Coronavirus is an overarching term that refers to a number of different strains of related viruses that all share similar features, most notably having a wreath of spike proteins on their surface that resemble a crown, hence the word corona. And no, the virus has nothing to do with Corona beer. These viruses can be further broken down into 4 major genera: alpha coronavirus, beta coronavirus, gamma coronavirus, and delta coronavirus, like the quadrants of the galaxy. The former 2 groups primarily infect mammals, whereas the latter 2 infect birds. The specific strain of virus that's currently causing the pandemic, named SARS-CoV-2, along with notable strains including MERS-CoV, the virus responsible for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, aka MERS, and SARS-CoV, the virus responsible for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, aka SARS, are all beta coronaviruses. COVID-19, which is short for Coronavirus Disease 2019, refers to the illness that's being caused by SARS-CoV-2. How does SARS-CoV-2 infect humans? Viruses are parasites. They need to enter a host cell and hijack their host's replication machinery in order to create many copies of themselves, thereby enabling them to propagate. This is where the spike proteins found on the coronavirus surfaces come in handy. They function by binding to a specific protein on the surface of human cells in order for the virus to gain entry into the cells. The target of SARS-CoV-2 and other human coronaviruses is angiotensin converting enzyme 2, aka ACE2, which is commonly found on the surfaces of epithelial cells of the lungs and other tissues. Indeed, recently published papers have found mutations in the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, specifically in the receptor binding domain, which likely enabled the virus to associate better with human ACE2 and thus be able to effectively enter their new hosts. Where did SARS-CoV-2 come from? The evolutionary origins of SARS-CoV-2 is still under investigation. So far, the genomes of several SARS-CoV-2 isolated from infected patients have been sequenced, enabling comparisons to other known related strains of coronaviruses. SARS-CoV-2 is quite closely related to SARS-CoV, the virus responsible for the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s. However, the closest related strain of coronavirus that has been found thus far is one sequenced from bat samples, named BAT-CoV RATG13. The genomes between SARS-CoV-2 and BAT-CoV share 96% sequence identity. Some of the key differences between the 2 strains of virus are in the aforementioned spike protein, which has mutated in SARS-CoV-2 to be able to recognize human ACE2. Interestingly, the spike proteins of coronaviruses found in pangolins carry similar mutations to those of SARS-CoV-2. All current evidence indicate that the virus is of zoonotic origin and acquired its version of the spike protein via the natural processes of either mutation or recombination. There is absolutely no evidence that the virus was purposefully engineered by humans, but unfortunately that probably won't deter the conspiracy theorist. How does coronavirus testing work? All coronaviruses, including SARS-CoV-2, are single-stranded RNA viruses. This just means that the virus has a single strand of RNA as their genome, unlike cellular organisms, which almost exclusively have double-stranded DNA as their genome. Viruses are much more variable and can have single or double-stranded DNA or RNA as their genome. The standard testing procedure for detecting the virus in a patient involves a reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, RT-PCR. Basically, there are certain types of proteins known as DNA polymerases whose job it is to replicate a piece of DNA. With each round of replication, the amount of genetic material doubles. One strand of DNA becomes 2 strands, 2 strands become 4 strands, 4 strands become 8 strands, and so on and so forth. Because coronavirus contains RNA as their genetic material, a special type of protein known as reverse transcriptase is needed to first convert the RNA into DNA. From my understanding, reverse transcriptase is quite rare, and there is currently a shortage of it, resulting in the shortage of tests that we've been experiencing. To determine whether a person is infected, a nasopharyngeal swab is taken from a patient. The viral RNA in the sample, if it's present, is converted into DNA by reverse transcriptase. The DNA is then amplified in a reaction mixture containing DNA polymerase as well as short segments of DNA known as primers that are designed to specifically bind to a known sequence in the viral genome. The PCR is allowed to proceed with the primers binding to their target and the polymerase amplifying that region. After a number of rounds of amplification, there will be enough DNA generated to be detected via a special fluorescent stain. If a person is not infected, there will be no viral genome for the primers to bind to, and hence no DNA will be amplified as a result. There are currently also tests being developed that screen patients for the presence of antibodies produced in response to the coronavirus. While such tests are generally faster than the traditional PCR, they also tend to be less accurate and may yield a high rate of false negatives. Hydrochloroquine and azithromycin. Creating a novel drug will take many years. The alternative we have is to repurpose existing drugs to combat this new virus. The drugs hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, and azithromycin have been making the headlines after a few recent studies. In particular, one conducted by a group in France, have found significant reduction in the viral load of patients that are being treated by the drugs. Hydroxychloroquine, hydroxychloroquine is an analog of chloroquine, a drug that has traditionally been used to treat malaria and is apparently commonly prescribed in countries like India. Both hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine have exhibited antiviral activity towards SARS-CoV-2, with the former being considered safer for patient use than the latter. Azithromycin is an antibiotic that's typically used to combat bacterial infections. However, there have been studies in the past that have indicated it may also possess antiviral properties. The results are still preliminary, and more rigorous testing needs to be conducted to determine whether these drugs and other candidates are indeed safe and effective against SARS-CoV-2. Please do not try self-medicating. These are just some of the facts that I've been learning about coronaviruses. I will conclude with some positives that I hope will stem from the crisis. 1. Improved health and safety regulations in China and other countries, and a crackdown on poaching and the illegal wildlife trade. 2. Increased funding into our healthcare and research. 3. A greater appreciation for vaccines and their impact on our society. I may not understand the imperial system, but as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Perhaps we need to have a disaster or two to finally compel us into making some much needed and long overdue changes. Stay safe and healthy, Willow. Well, Willow, let me just tell you what a fantastic letter that I thank you for writing. Now I've got a bunch of letters, and this is a pretty good one. Oops, it was a pretty good one. This comes from Troy Ray. Troy Ray writes in and says, "Greetings, genre justice warriors. I've decided to write to you after..." No, I won't read it like that. "I've decided to write to you after a short text message exchange with my sister, who raises our 12-year-old nephew. It's been pointed out before by other imagination connoisseurs who have contributed, but I think it's important enough to bear repeating. Our text exchange went like this. Sis, so we just started Picard. Me, oh, it's not appropriate for children. I'm sure you don't want Jaden watching it. Heads up. Sis, really? So it has sexual content or graphic language? Me, yep. Okay, thanks for the heads up." And this reminds me of one of my primary criticisms of the show. "This is not a sequel to The Next Generation," said Alex Kurtzman. So the Romulans are right. The Federations are xenophobes. They both give in to fear. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What's the right choice? If there is no correct choice and no good guys, then what's the better option? The Star Trek option that appeals to intellect and compassion and curiosity? I think this show is something else. It was a different Star Trek show or even sci-fi story with the character Agnes, Rio, Raffi, and Soji, maybe even Narek and Narissa. It was a different show about the dystopian rise of the machines that we've seen so many times before. I think that was the show, but it needed a little more oomph, and so Patrick Stewart was added. And when Patrick Stewart came along, he got his input into the story, which reflected the speeches Picard has been giving in the show. The rise of fear and xenophobia, the retreat into isolationism, stuff like that. The two concepts were shoehorned together into Star Trek Picard, and that's why things are wonky. That's why it looks like Picard is a befuddled old man. This is why characters from TNG pop up at strange times in the narrative. They're in a different show from everyone else. Also, I believe the showrunners mock us. They're mocking the fans and destroying the character of Picard, intentionally or not. Every character in the show, with the exception of Rios and Agnes, castigate Picard, tear him down, and put him into his place. The showrunners don't like the idea of difficult moral questions being raised and answered in convenient 44-minute chunks. Life is not a TV show, and they think Star Trek is cheesy. They do not believe Jean-Luc Picard is a diplomat who uses reason, compassion, and compromise to solve problems. They believe he is delusional. They believe he is arrogant. In fact, the show tells us his defining trait. They don't like Picard's iconic, stirring speeches that make you think deeply and inspire a better way. The writers told us this in the episode Broken Pieces. Admiral Picard, with all due respect and at long last, shut the fuck up. When you love something, you have to love it enough to be strong and say, I can't let you do this. You've gone too far. This is the wrong path. I won't enable you anymore. Star Trek is in my DNA. I was born and raised on Star Trek. I love Star Trek, and I'll always love Star Trek. CBS, can you hear me? I love Star Trek. Thanks for your time, Troy. Well, Troy, I have to say, this is a fantastic letter, and thank you for writing it. It is quite good, and I very much appreciate you writing in to me, and so, which is great. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, our man Mark C., Mark Chure, is here with his letter that he said was going to be divisive. So this is about the comic industry. This is Mark's letter about the comic industry. And why did I just click off of it? I'm very interested to read this. Mark always sends very thoughtful letters about the state of the comic book industry. So here we go. Dear Rob, as I write this, I'm listening to you talk about the comic book industry, young readers, and you are looking at the result from the wrong end. First, let me say, from the retailer perspective, it brings me no joy to see this burn down. The local comic book shop owners are mostly good people who love comics and wish to bring them to others. From a publisher and creative perspective, good riddance. I think a lot of people are optimistic, and I hope they're right. I see this going to the end of May. How many shops can hold out for that long? Worse yet, there's a tipping point. At some point, there are so few shops around that it ceases to be profitable for Diamond to distribute comic books. And remember, neither Disney or AT&T bought companies to publish comics. They just got saddled with it. The sad part is, in my opinion, the publishers started the industry towards this cliff long ago. Retailers, who should have banded together, just accepted it. Only one distributor, getting rid of the comics code, getting rid of the newsstand, making content for an older, aging audience, comics being non-returnable. Now, while obviously some new readers will find their way, comics made it really, really hard for them to be found. When they did, a kid could no longer just safely grab the latest issue. My son wanted to get a new Batman comic during Snyder's Death of the Family run. As young as he was, I'd be a bad father giving him that book. So he never really showed interest again after being told no, it's too grown up for him. You had to go to a dedicated shop. Now over the last decade, you've had a dedicated app, but then the content changed. Agendas took hold, although many like myself would call it pandering. Many of the aging fanboys walked away when they complained openly about it. If you don't like my comic, don't read it. It wasn't meant for you. The cis white racist misogynist. That hints of Brie Larson. Curious. To make up for the lack of copies sold, publishers put it on the backs of retailers to carry a ton of product. Shops are carrying so many books. There's just a glut of bad or subpar comics. Marvel alone, not counting the $1 reprints and $3.99 facsimiles, still shipped over 80 titles last month. Now, Jim Lee and DC seem to want to try its ultimate experiment, a digital-heavy market. Digital comics have been a thing for over a decade. After the new car smell wore off, the best they could muster was about 10% of the market. Digital right now is a good distraction for readers, but in the end, you don't own anything. As an artist, I enjoy learning how to draw characters, sometimes while aping a particular artist's rendering style. Having tried that on a tablet, since you aren't moving the screen, you fight the tablet just staying on. And that there's something about the tactile feeling of holding it in your hand. The knowledge that it's at your reach whenever you want it, and not reliant on whether it's on Comixology. Plus, going to an app is a conscious choice. The reason the newsstand and hopefully Alliance Comics and Walmart sell is as an impulse. Shut up, buy this to keep the kids content while you get your shopping done. Digital doesn't afford you that. To see that as a major inroad for new readers defies logic. Honestly, I've seen the direct market dying of 1,000 cuts for a while. COVID-19 appears to have turned it into a stabbing. Personally, too many who ran the show starting 20 years ago are still around. The Joe Quesadas and Jim Lees of the world are great artists, but have made bad short-term choices. I see a need for the major corporations to wipe the slate clean, if they want to even think about fixing the problem. In the end, I hope the optimists are right, and we get a leaner, healthier market that puts its eyes on long-term viability and not just short-term gain. I'd love to be proven wrong. If not, it earns its demise. Wow, Mark. Well, for these uplifting times, no, I think that's a great letter, and you Mark is making very good points about the comic industry. I think, like other magazines that don't sell, you saddle the direct sale market with comics. They get a lot of product in. If the product doesn't move, they're just sitting on it. It's taking up space. They've spent money on it. They can't return it and get any money back. I think that's bad. And like everything else, I noticed this I've talked about this. I liked building plastic models since I was a little kid. Now I build exclusively when I build them. I either build flying model rockets or I build spaceship models. That's it. But, I go in and I you go to a hobby store or something and I'll go to KitCraft to get paint. And I ask, are kids building model kits? And they're just not. Like I would go in and when I was living in Canoga Park, there was a hobby store, and I asked the proprietor there, I said, do kids ever come in here to build models like planes and tanks? And I loved model kits when I was a kid. I had hundreds of model airplanes hanging from my ceiling, my bedroom, and model rockets. And he told me no, that the only time young people really came into his store was when a history teacher made his students build a subject, any subject they wanted, but had to build a subject from World War II and bring it to class. And that was the only time kids would come in. And I think, a lot of this stuff, we imagination connoisseurs, kids today have their own things. They've got video games. I mean, they've got stuff like Fortnite, before that Minecraft, and they've got things that were uniquely theirs. But I do think that there's something to be said. Comic books as a medium really were a 20th century medium. They came out of the 20th century. They were collected by us, like you said, the aging fan base. A lot of these things that we have are, they're just from a different era. And, pop culture changes. It alters. And how do you get kids? I mean, look, there's a singular joy if you're a comic book reader and you follow the comic books. But if they're not, I used to get so into comics. I do think that the 80s era, the shift in comic books, there were so many, like pop culture and like music. I'd go to the comic book store in the 80s and there were so many different kinds of books being put out, different artists, different writers, and they were approaching things from all different perspectives, and it was really interesting. And there is still a lot of great comics being published, but I don't know. I think you might be right. I don't know if kids, when I was a kid, I got into reading comic books even before Justice League. I was reading Richie Rich and Casper the Friendly Ghost and Jackie Jokers and the comic book medium. I was reading a lot of that stuff. And do kids have that? I mean, do they have there was I remember being at summer camp and passing around Richie Rich comics and stuff, and we loved all that, and that was sort of my gateway into comic books. And then of course that led me to superheroes and the Justice League and things like that. So yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff there. But I think you're not wrong. Let me just jump that let me jump back in here. And I haven't watched Vagrant Queen. Oh, Magic K sends in a tip and says, did you check out Russell T Davies' new Doctor Who content? I have not. I will probably get to it, though. I'd be curious to hear what he comes. I wish he would come back and write something like Torchwood's Children of Earth. If you guys haven't seen Torchwood's Children of Earth, 5 hours of some of the greatest science fiction that's been on TV in so long. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat, another one. Thanks for all the support of the channel, man. Of the films you've shown Elizabeth thus far, which is essential viewing if you could pick only one? Okay, that's really interesting. So on Whining About Movies, I have shown Elizabeth, Videodrome, Donnie Darko, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, Betty Blue, Possession, and In the Mood for Love. Which is essential viewing. I think of all the movies that I've shown her, I think the best movies that I would say in terms of if you're a cineast, I think Betty Blue and In the Mood for Love are the best overall films. As far as imagination connoisseurs go, I don't necessarily know if those would be people's favorite movies. God, that's a tough one. If I can only pick one. Gosh, I mean, I can't pick Videodrome. I can't pick Possession. I can't pick Buckaroo Banzai. I still, if I could pick one, for me personally, I would probably take in the Mood for Love because of everything it has to say about cinema and a transcendent story. And I mean, yeah, I would say In the Mood for Love, but probably second would be Betty Blue. Yeah, I think that would be... But again, I know that a lot of my audience is not going to... I think people like Videodrome and they like Buckaroo Banzai and Donnie Darko, but I think that, Betty Blue and In the Mood for Love are romances. They don't have a shred of the genre, anything to do with science fiction, fantasy, and horror, or genre. Other than the fact that the genre I meant maybe would be romance. But yeah, I would probably say, and from a cinematic perspective, I'd take In the Mood for Love, I think. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, Rob, call me Snake. While not on the AFI 100, I did watch Excalibur for the first time today. Wow. Are you the mother and the father now, Merlin? And I'm continuing on with my all-encompassing Star Trek journey by watching all things Star Trek in release order. Just finished the second season TNG episode Q Who yesterday, also the introduction of the Borg. Well, Evan, you must be having fun. Boy, I'd love to know what you think of Excalibur. Excalibur was a movie that when I first saw it, I didn't like it that much, to be honest. And over the years, I came to just love it. Love it. But it's very, very, it's very stylized. It's very stylish. I love the acting. And what was it like for you seeing people like Liam Neeson and Patrick Stewart, in the early days in Excalibur, and just the filmmaking and the design work, the use of Wagner. Oh, I love Excalibur. I love hearing people's journey going through Star Trek and pop culture, that I've grown up with, but you're going through it for the first time. I love hearing about that. Destiny Captain sent in a super chat and says, Rob, what really happened behind the scenes with Ronald D. Moore, Brandon Braga, and the development of Enterprise and the end of Voyager? Did you learn anything while doing the docs? Well, look, I'll tell you, I think the most fascinating, obviously for me, while I love talking to the actors, it was great. It was great sitting down for long periods of time and talking with all the next generation actor. The only actor I really didn't get to interview was Whoopi Goldberg, because I wasn't Roger Lay when we were supposed to interview her. It was Hurricane Sandy, and I was in London. I was actually in London seeing Skyfall, and I got waylaid coming home, and I didn't get to interview Whoopi. But it was interviewing Rick Berman during Enterprise, and we didn't really talk about Voyager, but I think that it wasn't. They wanted to make a new. See, for Rick, it was all business. Rick Berman was a businessman, and that's what he was doing. He was, and I still think. What I learned is I still think he thinks a little bit that he was slumming. Rick Berman, one of the things he had us in his house. He invited us in his house so we would go there and spend hours with him. He was a very thoughtful, intelligent man. And when you go into his house, he has a beautiful wife. His house is beautifully appointed. He travels around the world. He likes the finest things. He's a very refined guy. And he is not the kind of guy that sits around watching thousands of hours of science fiction television or whatever. He came at it from this perspective of, I'm trying to make this thing. I think he was very rigid, and he knows he was rigid. And I think in a way, if he could do it again, he would be a little less rigid about what he thought. But he had a very limited view, I think, of what Star Trek was. But he had to keep it going, and he kept it going. Remember, Rick Berman, 25 seasons of Star Trek over 18 years. That's pretty spectacular. It's pretty amazing. And, Ron Moore, again, one of the nicest guys in the world. And Brannon was, they were really good friends. I don't know. I think, look, when you work on something for such a long period of time, you develop these things, and friendships kind of maybe can change, and the nature of these things change, and people want to move on and do their own thing. Ultimately, in the entertainment business, people want to go on and they want to be responsible for their own thing so they can be the creator of it. So it's something that they could call their own, which I totally understand. I totally get it. And when you I think nobody would, David Icke obviously was a big part of Battlestar Galactica, but I think it was really, Ron Moore, when you think Battlestar Galactica, Ron Moore, it was sort of Ron Moore's show. At least I always thought of it that way. But I don't know if we learned anything. I learned about Rick Berman, and I learned about how he approached Star Trek. And it was very interesting. The first thing that we shot with them was we shot, when Dave Parker and Greg Carson and I were doing the Valley Girl Blu-ray, or the DVD back in 2003, we had come up with this idea that what we wanted to do was, I wanted to see just a conversation between Martha Coolidge and Nicolas Cage. And we called it In Conversation. It was an in-conversation piece, and I don't know if I'd seen a piece quite like that, but we were just we did a 3-camera shoot, a 2-shot and singles on them, and just let them talk. And I really liked that piece because you got to see people, they were comfortable with each other, so they could have an honest conversation. And we did kind of the same thing. I told Roger when we were doing the Enterprise documentaries, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we did these in-conversation pieces? And we did the Inside the Writer's Room, but that was sort of, Seth MacFarlane hosted a roundtable for the season 3 Blu-ray of Star Trek. But for Rick and Brannon, we just went to Rick's house and we set them down in front of each other, and they just had a conversation. And it was fascinating to listen to, because one of the things that people need to understand is they know that there are fans out there, but the creatives in Hollywood, it's kind of changing a little bit because there's more people that are fans that are creatives, but the fans are people that they're not considering when they're making shows. People are trying to make the best shows that they can, and they're not. And for me, I don't necessarily want for everything everybody's heard me say, I don't necessarily need slavish devotion to canon as much as I want great storytelling that makes sense. And if you are working in the science fiction genre, there's 100 years of literature that has already dealt with, look, in movies and television, as the critical drinker, everybody's got to watch Critical Drinker's video, his reassessment or his review of the entire series of Picard, because he's absolutely spot on. And I, by the end, you could hear how exasperated he was. Like, for anybody to watch Star Trek, when you watch a show, when you're dealing with the idea of synths or artificial life and what this all means, and as everyone points out, even the Mass Effect, like Mass Effect 3, there's all of these things that Picard touched on that we have already seen in a bunch of other shows, a bunch of other books, and a bunch of other movies. And when you're going to go touch on those subjects again, you got to know this genre. You've got to know your synth genre. And they didn't. You're watching these things, you're going, well, wait a minute. It was all so half-baked. And I think that's what Rick Berman was not so much interested in canonical Star Trek as he was telling a good story. Are you back again? Come here. What, I've been on too much? Oh yeah, I know. Okay, I'll give you one more cookie. I know. Okay, Squeaker, come here. Come on. Gotta come get it. Come on. Come on. Come on. There you go. Because if you can't be on camera, if the people can't see you, then you can't have a cookie. Otherwise, what good are you? That's your payment. That's your appearance fee as a cookie, right? That's right. Oh yes. That's right. That's her appearance fee. That's what she has on her rider on her car contract. But so that's what I think I learned is that what I know, and Gilbert gets one too. It wasn't so much about canonical Star Trek. They were just trying to tell a good stories. And I had to respect what Rick was trying to do. And I think that's what I learned the most, I think. Casanova Frankenstein sends in a super chat and asks if I'd watch The Naked Director on Netflix. No. I don't know what that is, but I'll watch that. Star Wars Rocks sends in a 3-parter. Hi, Rob. Weekly cartoon recommendation. Tenkai Knights. It's about a team of 4 teenagers who end up being the successors of the previous Tenkai Knights. Their powers came from alien tech that they got for free from an antique shop. I know it sounds like Power Rangers, but it isn't because the tech basically turns them into alien robots. The second cartoon I'm going to recommend is Moncart. It's about a 12-year-old kid who has an ambitious dream to become the greatest Moncart racer and maybe get revenge on the knight that has been consumed by a dark entity who said knight to kill his father. I hope you'll enjoy the 2 cartoons, and while I'm not a Trekker, I do love Star Wars episodes 1 through 6 because I grew up with the prequels. Oh, and you can find Tenkai Knights on Disney Plus, by the way. All right, man. I'll look at that. Anthony Gonzalez says, hey, Rob, have you ever retired a human by mistake? Well, Anthony, that would be a line from Blade Runner. Oh, come on, Tallulah. Are you really going to bark? Do I have to kick you out? Tallulah. No. See, this is why I don't let them in. But since they're bored, okay, if I give you a cookie, we shut up. See, she just wants a cookie. I know. I was going to be like, they've trained you. This is all you get. If you're going to, you guys can come up. Okay, you come up. There you go. All right. It's pretty good, right? Pretty good, right? Look at these guys. Who doesn't love these guys? I love these guys and girls. Yes. Yes, buddy. Yeah. How you doing? Huh? Oh. You guys need to be groomed so badly. Maybe I'll give you a bath later. What do you say? Huh? What do you say? There you go. Wow, it's almost like I train these dogs. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Burnett. That's me. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, thanks, Willow. I really like your letters and your writing style. Keep sending them to Rob. I don't know if you've seen the sci-fi TV show Firefly, but I'd like to see some letters reviewing the show and the Serenity movie if you have time. Thanks again. Well, for those of you who like Willow's letters, and I like Willow's letters very much, she's one heck of a writer. And as she's told us in the past, she is an immigrant. Her parents are first-generation Chinese immigrants. And I find her writing to be beautiful, which is interesting because I would assume her first language was Chinese. So I don't know if it's Mandarin or Cantonese, but you can go to the Burnettwork.net website, and she has a little column called Willow Talk where her letters are featured. So go to the website and check it out, and you can read more of what she has to say. Timbula the Spider Monkey, Tim's here. Rob, I'm bored. What plaything can you offer me today? An obscure body in the SK system. The inhabitants refer to it as the planet Earth. How peaceful it looks. I'm not wearing a ring, but if I was, yes, Tim. You know, how great is it going to be to get Flash Gordon on 4K? Oh, I can't wait. Thank you, Studio Canal. I can't wait to get Flash Gordon in 4K. Simon sends in a super chat and says, I think it's sheer fucking hubris that Picard didn't reach out to Geordi to help him with the synths. LaForge and Data were best friends. Man, I am with you there. I don't know why he didn't. I really don't. Craziness. But you know what? It is kind of odd, to be honest. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I don't know what you're going to do. Amir B sends in a letter. I can read that. This one comes from Amir B, who's written in a lot. Amir B says, why being dark, edgy, and shocking in modern entertainment grinds my gears? Hi, Rob. Thanks for reading my previous letter. I wanted to write to you for something that has been bugging me for a while. Over the past 10 years or so, there has been a trend in both mainstream movies or TV shows to produce more dark, edgy, and shocking content. Excuse me. These themes are materialized by... I had pizza before I went on. These themes are materialized by creating the show, movie more nihilistic, having edgier storylines or dialogue, and more commonly, having shocking moments, especially by having the main character killed unexpectedly or having more graphic violence. Rob, I love cynical movies. Exploring a dark subject matter with a hopeless point of view is something I genuinely enjoy. However, as a fan of this theme in entertainment, I'm getting fed up with all the trends I mentioned above. To answer why I need to discuss two trendsetters of having dark and shocking elements in stories. These themes have always been in the movies, but I believe the two pictures set the trends in the past decade. I'm talking about The Dark Knight and Game of Thrones. I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones that stood out to me. Nolan's Dark Knight changed not only the way comic books can be made into movies, but also movies themselves. The movie was dark for its time and maybe the first of its kind. It had the shocking moment when in the middle, the love interest of the superhero gets blown to pieces. Additionally, it ends with Batman's defeat, where, to paraphrase the Joker, he takes Gotham's shining knight and takes him down to their, Joker and Batman's, level. If The Dark Knight set trends for being dark, Game of Thrones set the trends for shock and killing the main characters. Whether it was throwing a kid off the window or a sibling having sex to the beheading of Ned Stark and the Red Wedding, Game of Thrones set a lot of trends, and TV was never the same after that. Years have passed, and movies and shows nowadays try and be as dark and shocking as those trendsetters. In my opinion, these elements work perfectly in both Game of Thrones until Season 6 and The Dark Knight, but they're not working for many current entertainments. Why do these elements work for these movies and shows and not many of the current entertainment? And I can think of 3 reasons. Those themes, being dark and shocking, were a part of the story, and not just added for the sake of having it. I took a screenplay class once, and our instructor said that in the first 5 or 10 minutes of your film, you must set up your world and theme of the movie. You watch The Dark Knight. In the first 10 minutes, you understand the whole world where the story is taking place. Joker is a madman with no loyalty to his team, who steals from the mob and has a penchant for dark humor. On the other hand, you see the world. Corruption is rampant. The mob has control of many places, including the banks. Being dark is embedded in the story. Similarly, in the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, when someone died, it was to push the story narrative. The writers didn't kill them just to add shock value or set the trend for the next Twitter debate. True Detective Seasons 1 and Chernobyl are prime examples of how to make a dark show where being dark or shocking is a consequence of the story. That's I think very, very astute, is that it's the same way that you can't set out to make a cult movie. You know, people try, but cult movies happen. You can't make them happen. And like, whether it's with Nail and I or the Rocky Horror Picture Show, or pick whatever favorite movie you have that's now a cult film, it's the movie itself, because of what it was. Buckaroo Banzai even. They set out to make something that attracted a certain number or certain kind of person, and that the movie itself creates the cult. Once you try and set out to make something like that, I mean, Look, Game of Thrones was a reflection also of what it was like to live in medieval times. And it, it was bleak, and there wasn't it's not like we didn't have a lot of heating going on. There's running water, there's a lot of there's disease, and I think that they were following George R. R. Martin's book. But George R. R. Martin's book, remember, what made Game of Thrones compelling was not the incestuous relationship the Lannisters had with that Cersei and Jaime had with one another. I mean, that was obviously part of it. And by the way, incestuous relationships among siblings was not necessarily that uncommon throughout human history, especially in certain bloodlines and that way. But George R. R. Martin was just drawing upon trends. Sure, he was accentuating and exaggerating those trends, but really, if you look at Game of Thrones, yes, is it high entertainment, the bloodletting and who's jumping into bed with whom? Of course, but really, Game of Thrones was dealing with human nature and politics and power, and it dealt with them in I think, a fairly realistic and believable manner. And the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, 4 or 5 seasons of Game of Thrones were so good because they had peak verisimilitude. You actually believed what you were watching. And that was also part of the milieu. One of the problems that I have with Star Trek, which is so incongruous now, Discovery and Picard are set in a Star Trek universe that is unrecognizable. Now, if you don't have an attachment to the Star Trek universe and you're just coming to it for the first time, or you're a casual viewer, I can see how, coming off of Game of Thrones or Vikings or whatever the hell else you're going to watch, that you could jump into Star Trek and not see anything wrong with it, especially if you're a new viewer to the franchise. I still think, to me, it's the storytelling in Star Trek that it's a lot of it's nonsensical. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, especially if you're comparing and contrasting Star Trek to other. What's really interesting is if you look at the original series, there were a lot of the time when you could look at a show like, okay, Balance of Terror. Balance of Terror was a riff on submarine warfare. I mean, to the point where you have to run silent, run deep. I mean, literally that close. But it as a riff on submarine warfare, it was a really good riff. You could be there and go, oh, I recognize this. I totally get where they're coming from. In terms of military discipline, and we did have Japanese soldiers fighting on the side of America during World War II. There were immigrant Americans that were also. So this idea that Spock is revealed to have kinship with the Romulans, and the fact that there was suspicion there, all of that stuff has been dealt with in other mediums before, other than Star Trek. But Balance of Terror did it in a way where you absolutely believe it within the confines of Star Trek. They did a hell of a job adapting a submarine story, adapting a battle story to a science fiction show. And the problem that I have with Discovery is they're cherry-picking all of these very well-trodden sci-fi concepts, whether it's synthetic life, whether it's crazy AI, and they're doing all of it really badly. There's so many great examples of stories that are told within that milieu. I mean, this whole idea of synths has already been done. I mean, Galactica, Westworld, take your pick. But we've seen it on TV, and you're looking at all of these really interesting ideas. I mean, they don't even deal with the fact that the main character goes from becoming a human being to becoming a synth. And they don't even touch upon that. I mean, I guess we're supposed to infer it in the last episode that Picard is now a synth. And none of it ties in. We hear about a synth uprising. Picard's all, oh, woe is me. Oh, my God, the synth uprising. Mars is still on fire. And they don't even deal with now, well, our main character. The whole thing should have been about the journey of biology to synthetic. Because if you know anything about the coming the coming singularity, read about AI, read Ray Kurzweil, all of these things we will eventually slough off our biological bodies so we can be granted immortality and live forever, or digitize our consciousness into the cloud or something. There's all of these ideas that are coming that our science is doing. You can read books on it even today. And none of that is touched on in the show. It's almost like the only thing they knew about the idea of synths and synthetic life or whatever is what they've seen in video games and past shows. That's what I find most disappointing of all, is that there's so many interesting extrapolations on what synthetic life could mean if you read scientific literature of the day. Even the Fermi paradox or the Drake equation, if you're talking about why haven't we found alien life forms, and one of the theories is that biological life would eventually evolve to the digital, and our existence would be so different that we're not even, anybody who's gone through that would never even be looking for us anymore. They're not even sending out radio signals to find someone like us. That would be like us, again, trying to communicate with an anthill. And there's all of that is very interesting. And there, like I said, there's something that could have been really interesting about this whole thing about burgeoning synthetic life, that after Measure of a Man, Starfleet didn't listen anymore. You know what? I didn't even finish your letter. Let me finish your letter. And this is my whole point. Being dark, shocking, or edgy works when it was part of the story. When you add them just to have them is when everything goes wrong. Ironically, Game of Thrones, which once killed characters as part of the story, became a victim of the trend itself, set in later seasons, where they start killing their main characters just to add the shock value that they had established. In movies, too, the movies and shows that are effective are consistent in tone. Another issue I have with many movies and shows as they try to be dark is the lack of tonal consistency. I honestly think everyone should learn about tonal consistency from Vince Gilligan and his team. How they managed the Breaking Bad universe in the past 12 years to such precise consistency is nothing short of amazing. However, the same cannot be said for other products. This is especially an issue with popular IPs and franchise movies over the decade, where new creators come in and want to create something that is not tonally consistent with prior movies. I'm sure the examples are abundant, but take Picard, for example. The reason modern Trek doesn't work for me is that I can't believe in this work, because what I see now is not consistent with the work of Star Trek that I saw many years ago. I'll use a hypothetical example. Imagine if Christopher Nolan came and made Batman Begins as a continuation of Batman and Robin, and Clooney somehow is still Batman. Batman Begins with the world Nolan defined works perfectly, and I love it. But even I got to admit, if I were introduced this film as the continuation of Batman and Robin, it just wouldn't feel right. And I wouldn't believe it because it contradicts the world defined in prior movies. That's why you have reboots, to start with a clean slate. 3. Finally, being dark doesn't mean no humor. Being dark is about the story. The writers can certainly insert funny dialogues that work with the story. After all, humor is something we use to cope with stressful times, and perhaps there's no better place to use witty dialogue than in dark movies. All good movies with dark themes use witty dialogue and dark humor frequently. The Dark Knight is filled with funny one-liners. True Detective Season 1 deals with satanic cults, child murders, but between all these dark subject matter, it has some of the funniest banter I've seen in years between Rust and Marty. I don't understand when being dark started to mean a lack of humor. Especially in dark movies, we need funny banter to like the characters. That's why Zack Snyder's movies never worked for me. I get his style, but my God, why in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman is everyone brooding and so serious? That's why, Rob, as someone who loves this style of movie and show, I have become fed up with all these so-called new edgy and dark shows taking someone's eyeball out. Are you kidding me? Anyways, I digress. Thanks again for reading my letter. Stay safe, Amir. Well, Amir, that was a great letter, and I want to thank you for sending that in. Look, I mean, the thing is, darkness is cool, and everybody wants to be cool. You know, you look at the shows that are Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, even within television circles, are two of the most revered shows amongst writers, filmmakers, producers, and everybody wants to do that show. I mean, can you imagine, like, nowadays, you're looking, if you're tasked to take over Star Trek and you go back and you watch Next Generation is not cool. Not today. It's not cool. So what you have are this new crop of writers, or people like Alex Kurtzman. They want to be cool. They want to be part of the cool kids. They want to write the Breaking Bad and the Better Call Saul of Star Trek. And I understand that. I get it. I totally understand. But you can't ever do that, because Star Trek at its very DNA, is never going to be Breaking Bad, and it's never going to be, Better Call Saul. It's never going to be those things. It's never going to be Game of Thrones. It's never going to be that way, because Star Trek is about inherently supposed to be about optimistic human beings that are doing optimistic things, like going out and seeking out strange new worlds and new life and new civilizations. Star Trek is inherently a show that is about goodness in people. It's about goodness. And if you're going to try and make it about people that aren't good, I mean, even the Romulan command, I mean, people just do not get this. The portrayal of the Romulans in Picard, we're the evil, dastardly villains. I'm going to fuck my brother. That was so not what... Go back and watch Balance of Terror. There's everything you need to know about Romulan society is in Balance of Terror. Look at the conversations the Centurion and the Romulan commander have. I mean, you look at that, it's like watching Shakespeare compared to the conversations. You're watching Narissa say to Narek, "Did you fuck her? Did you fuck him?" I mean, literally. I'm watching this going, first of all, do they use the word fuck in Romulan? Do the Romulans have the equivalent of fuck? I mean, I guess. Who knows? But you look at that and you're like, the Romulans they might be villains, but they're sort of elegant. They're erudite. Their machinations and their scheming is not necessarily because they're evil. The Romulans were duty bound to find out if Federation defenses were penetrable, and if they are, they're going to sweep across Federation space and try and get some, because that's what they do. They're duty bound to do that. And it's not necessarily because they're evil, that's their way. If there is weakness, it's our duty to exploit it. It's our duty to bend weakness to our will. And that's part of their civilization. But in this, well, anyway. Speaking of Dark Knight, this comes from Dark Knight. This next letter. Dark Knight writes this in. "Hi, Rob. This is my first email of a content creator, maybe to a content creator, but I wanted to voice my thoughts. So my first thoughts after watching episode 10 of Picard. 1. I did not even care about the holding hands. It was more like the panning from Blondie soccer dude to 7 of 9 pothead to Picard DNA robot. It was almost implying that the 95-year-old and the 23-year-old synths are going to hook up. I literally yelled, 'What is this? The Love Boat?' 2. And they literally had a magic wand, like what a purple magic wand, and just use your imagination rainbow. I think the writers forgot this is a sci-fi show. The monsters that were coming through the portal look more like Decepticons. I think it might actually have been a low-key crossover, to take the credit. And no one removed the tower while Superhero Girl left, so at any moment one of the abused synths or the short buff synths will reopen it? But remember the last episode of Voyager with time-traveling tech and Borg plating? And the last episode of TNG with the 3 warp core ships with cloaking? Where's all of that? Could they have not done something cool, make something interesting visually? Why did Super DNA Robot Lady not transport the dying person to the med lab with all of this magical technology? I thought they said in like episode 1 that Data's imprint on B4 failed or was corrupted or something. You've been complaining about time and distance, but I think it's a typical sci-fi TV trope, and I'm pretty sure that we've seen the same thing in TNG, Voyager, and even one of the movies. I think Insurrection. It's been a while. We have no idea how far things are away from each other or how fast they were traveling. I feel that you were whining about it, not critiquing it. I do understand the whining because the show is disrespectful to everything from before, but Star Trek has never been perfect. I wanted to comment on what you keep saying about Star Trek's first season not being bad. The original series, and I think it had the best conclusion for any serialized show. Voyager's first season's pretty good, actually. Is it just me, or does this series feel more like a blend of Firefly, and Star Trek does not feel like either of them, and it does not feel like a 24th century adventure? It feels like this is actually a precursor to Harry Potter. All of the wands are leftover tech from this Star Trek universe after the Decepticons wipe out all reality and the Milky Way, and the synths leave, and life starts all over again. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for being a fun person. I like listening to you. I first heard of you on Midnight's Edge, even though I thought you were more composed than them. Or, oh, one more. I thought you cannot be a lover of film if you refuse to watch a classic like Sound of Music. I understand if you just did not get to it, but if you're refusing to watch it, that's almost insulting to film as an art form. It's like walking through an art gallery and refusing to look at the Van Gogh because I heard this art is too weird. If you do not like it, that's fine, but at least give it a chance and make your decision. Thanks for everything in this weird time. Dark Knight. Well, thank you, Dark Knight. I very much appreciate that. Thanks for writing in. I don't disagree with you. I'm going to watch Sound of Music. I don't think it's a bad movie. I mean, Robert Wise made it. Robert Wise made it. Let's see where I'm at here. Simon sends in a super chat and says, I think it's sheer fucking hubris that Picard didn't reach out to Geordi to help him with the synths. LaForge and Data were best friends. Yes, sir, I read that, and you're correct, Simon. Alexander Wilson sends in a super chat and says, look at sports. Sports Illustrated is a shell of itself, owned by Warner. It was the first weekly magazine to print in color. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. I see a lot of the Kingdome and Key Arena in their photo archives. Yeah. You know, the Key Arena used to just be called the Coliseum. What Alexander Wilson is pointing out is the Kingdome and the Key Arena, the Coliseum, was where their arenas in Seattle. The Key Arena was where the Seattle Supersonics played, and they don't because they don't exist anymore. And then, of course, the Kingdome was where all the football games were played until they blew it up and replaced it. I saw Evel Knievel in the Kingdome. I also saw Kiss in the Key Arena. That was my first rock concert. So yeah. I didn't know that. That's really interesting, Alexander. I didn't know that Sports Illustrated was the first magazine that printed in color. Stubble McShave says, in whining about movies, you show Elizabeth movies that she's never seen. When will she reverse the roles and show you Sound of Music and then ask you questions about it afterwards? I'm sure that's coming. That will be coming, Stubble. It will be coming. Bob Koal sends in a tip and says, checking the AFI 100 for the 2C list as you suggested. Only 3 films from the 80s? I checked the 10th anniversary version, Fellowship of the Ring aside, among the talkies, 80s is still the last at 8. In the 70s, there's 20, the 60s, 17, the 50s, the 16, the 30s, 12, and the 90s and 40s, 11. Well, there's still 8. I mean, look. Here's I think the interesting thing about that is we all love the movies that we grew up with the most. And, you know, as children of the 80s and all that, we probably saw, the people that watch this channel are probably, they grew up watching movies from the 80s, the 90s. But, you know, what about the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? There was a lot of great movies made in that time. It's just that people tend not to go back past a certain point. And I think, you know, the AFI Top 100 list, they're all great. They're not saying that there's only 8 movies of the 80s to watch, but they're talking about the 100 greatest movies of all time. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I stand by my assertion. You should dive right in and watch some of those movies because they're great. Hassan sends in a tip and says, if a pair of geeks were writing a movie like Free Enterprise today, what do you think it would be about? Who would be their William Shatner? It'd be nice to let Elizabeth celebrate International Women's Day on her own show and let her pick a movie, Rob. Okay. I get it. People, I'll have to let Elizabeth pick movies. The problem is, though, there's very few movies, I mean, other than Sound of Music, that I either haven't seen or that she's seen that I haven't. But okay. Your question's really good. Well, first of all, when we made Free Enterprise, which came out in June of 99, the whole idea of geek culture has completely changed. We were right on the cusp of geek culture going mainstream. You know, there were other things at the time, stuff like Spaced, Edgar Wright's series Spaced, which came a little bit afterwards. Then, of course, we now have Big Bang Theory. So it's a good question. Who would their idol be? I don't even know if there is anyone like the modern equivalent of William Shatner, because it was just a different time. It was the way people consume things, and I think that, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know, because Star Trek is unique in the sense, I guess it would be a character from Star Wars or something, but even then it's different. The reason that we picked William Shatner is because William Shatner, in addition to being Captain Kirk, had at the time, he was our childhood idol, but he was also inherently goofy. His real life he was not Captain Kirk in his real life as much as we wanted him to be. And it was really interesting having a character like Captain Kirk where his real life didn't necessarily reflect being Captain Kirk. And why should any actor's life reflect that? But his life in particular was wacky. He did wacky stuff like T.J. Hooker and Rescue 911 and his comedy appearances, and to William Shatner, that you could do that about. I don't think that there's anyone that's created that kind of indelible impression on kids of a certain era and then has had an out with suggestions. But I don't know what that would be. I don't know who that would be. That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know, but I'm afraid to say it. I think old that has never had a long-term relationship before, and after his command of Enterprise. Even Kirk and Sisko, that is a really interesting observation. That's they didn't really touch on that, but that's interesting. That's really interesting. The founder 865 sends in a super chat and says, "Do you think part of the problem with New Trek is the serialized format? The episodic format of the old shows were far better, I think. We got new stories and adventures each week. Episode 10 felt like The Rise of the Synths Part 10. Boring story for 10 hours. You know what? I don't think the serialized format was wrong. I think the story that was being told was all over the place. In fact, what you want over a serialized story, if you're going to do a serialized story, is a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I mean, you don't even deal with, like, I still don't understand why was Bruce Maddox in that story? And what was his relationship to the synths? How come Soji and Daj were the way they were? Like, none of it makes any sense. If you go back, maybe if I rewatch it again, I don't know if I ever will, but if I rewatched it again, I would see what they're trying to do. But none of it hung together to me. The stuff that went from I mean, it's interesting. We found out Ann Magnuson, who played our favorite sheer fucking hubris admiral, she was originally in command of the fleet that shows up at the end of Picard. She posted on a friend of mine's Facebook page two days ago, or yesterday, that they had shot her scene, and it was great. But at the last minute, they decided to have Riker. I mean, it's a great choice having Riker there. But it just seemed, I mean, yeah, it was fan service and all that, but she was more of a character. She had something more, the relationship she had with Picard was more relevant. It just goes to show they should have made it like All Good Things. You know, when Geordi, in All Good Things, Geordi comes, we already basically saw a version of what we wanted to see was All Good Things done differently, because it was the same story. Geordi goes and asks, talks to Picard at his vineyard, and he is off on an adventure with Q and everything. And it's interesting. You go back and you watch All Good Things. It's so much better than Picard. And when Picard was closer to Next Generation is when it was good. All of the other stuff was gobbledygook that didn't make much sense. And you went from this place to this place, and they just kept piling up. There's all this stuff. They basically destroyed the modern, whatever the Trek universe is now, where Picard is. There's an evil race of synths out there that will destroy the universe that you can call. I mean, nothing other than the Zhat Vash went home. I mean, what are they going to do now? It's so weird. There was nothing that was accomplished other than killing Picard, and he's now a synth. So It's bizarre. And I think the format, if you're telling a great story, it's great. If you want to tell a limited series, it can be fantastic. But the story has to be fantastic. And but that's really interesting. I don't know, man. Alexander Wilson sends in another super chat. Thank you, sir. Sports Illustrated has been, I think you meant to say Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated has been an innovator and a change system for this country. For Brown versus the Board of Education, they used Oh, okay. You are meaning sports. So Alexander says, sports itself. Sports itself has been an innovator and a change system for America, for this country. For Brown versus the Board of Education, they used Jackie Robinson and the Dodgers as the example that color and non-color could coexist. I didn't know that. That's amazing. I've always thought sports was important, but I didn't know that about. That's really interesting. Brown versus the Board of Education, they used Jackie Robinson and the Dodgers. Wow, that's really cool. No, I think sports are hugely important. Team sports are a great way to teach. They're also fun to watch. So yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I didn't know that about the Board of Education. That's really interesting. Anthony Gonzalez sends in a tip and says, to me, there are very few things more absurd than someone who would watch It's a Wonderful Life in color. What would you say to someone to dissuade them from watching it this way? Well, I would say you're watching something that has fake color. It's not even real color. It's the movie was shot in black and white. That's how you should watch it. Watching a colorized version of It's a Wonderful Life, you're watching someone else's interpretation of what the movie should look like in color, but color film didn't even really exist at the time that movie was even made. So you're not really watching the movie, you're watching a bastardized version of it. And if that's what you want to do, if you want to watch a bastardized version of something because you're not smart enough or you're not tolerant enough to go back and watch something that has historical value and importance, well then, perhaps you're not even worth trying to convince. But yes, I would never watch It's a Wonderful Life in color. Timula the Spider Monkey says, I know the folks here don't need to hear this, but people should definitely go back and watch older films. Only one of my top 5, Akira, was made after I was born. The others, Seven Samurai, King Kong, Lawrence of Arabia, and Dr. Strangelove, were not. Yeah, I agree with you. I just think that it's really hard now for audiences. Like I've said before, when I was growing up, I was used to seeing things in color and black and white, and I was very aware that when they were made. I mean, Twilight Zone went off the air 4 years, 64, 3 years. The original Twilight Zone went off the air 3 years before I was born. And that used to freak me out even when I was a little kid. I was like, God, just missed it. And I would never think of not watching the Twilight Zone. I mean, the Twilight Zone was actually rather contemporary. That would be like not watching The Simpsons or something. It's such a weird. Simpsons was way older. 30 seasons now? But I don't understand why people don't go back and watch things. But I mean, I do understand because it's hard. It is harder for the technique of filmmaking, the way films are made, the way they're paced, the way they look. Very different now than it used to be, and I get all that. But like you, I just don't understand why somebody would have a prejudice against that. But when you grow up, there's a lot more films now than there were like 50 years ago. There's a lot more movies, and people want to get through. People want to watch the things that are relevant to the time that they live in, and that's why I've always said pop culture is like, you got 20 years and then it goes away, or it drifts away. And I think that's what happens. And it's hard for people to go back and watch. Look, most of my favorite movies are older movies. Stanley Kubrick, Dr. Strangelove is, I think, one of the most brilliant satires ever made. I love that. And I think people should go back and watch older movies. But sometimes people are not going to get into them. You need to curate movies. Like I would never try and if I knew somebody wouldn't like a movie, I don't know if I would tell them to watch it. I would have to curate older movies for people knowing that they would enjoy watching them. So, but I think people should, yeah, like you said, I mean, all the movies that I love, when I talk about my favorite, we get a lot of lists of people's favorite movies in the John Campy show, and a lot of those lists they're usually great lists. I don't disagree usually with anything on the lists, but they are very mainstream. Most of them are very modern. You get few movies, like people will say Star Wars or Godfather, those are into the 70s, but you don't get much before that. Which is too bad, but that's to be expected. I mean, the further we get away from movies are really of the time that they're from, and I know they can get a little strange. This one comes from Omar94, this letter. Hi, Rob. This might be a stupid letter. There are no stupid letters. But here goes. One thing I find lacking about directors now is the lack of remembrance, so to speak. What I mean is that I don't see them as iconic directors people will know in the years to come. A lot of the big-name directors of today's generation, and I include me since I'm a millennial, like Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher, they're well-known and make movies people like. I just don't think they will be remembered or talked about in the future like Fritz Lang, Sergei Eisenstein, Ingmar Bergman, Kurosawa, Hitchcock, John Ford, Howard Hawks, Frank Capra, Billy Wilder, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, James Cameron, Woody Allen, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Zemeckis, etc. What do you think? Do you think I'm talking nonsense? Thanks, and live long and prosper. That's actually a really good question. Here's the thing. It's only because they're like the directors that you mentioned. Hitchcock made 53 feature films, and it spanned. I mean, he made movies in the 20s, the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. So he spanned and he made 53 movies. But I do think that Chris Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, and Fincher, people are not going to forget Quentin Tarantino anytime soon. And remember, Reservoir Dogs came out in the early 90s. So Tarantino has been around almost making movies for 30 years. And that's if you think about film history, that's a long chunk of change in film history. That's a long time. And he's made 9 movies now, and I can't imagine he would be stopping at 10. I don't know why he would want to, but maybe he wants to enjoy his life. He's a father or becoming a father, or just became a father. But I think that, all of these, and when you start to look into film history, there are these giants that emerge. And I think that David Fincher, his oeuvre of work, I mean, when you look at Fight Club and you look at Seven, and you look at The Social Network, these are films that are going to be remembered. He's going to be remembered, and his filmmaking will be remembered. And I mean, maybe not, because remember, in 20 years, people are going to be still looking at his work. People are still going to be finding that stuff. And I do think that Chris Nolan with his Batman trilogy will loom large. His other movies, whether it's The Prestige or Inception, Dunkirk, I mean, he's a world-class filmmaker. And I think these people will be remembered. I think the difference is the way films are perceived culturally. Films are not as culturally significant as they used to be. And what I mean about that is that our film-going culture, especially like in the 60s, has changed. There's films like Godard and Truffaut and Antonioni, and there's a lot of foreign directors that were really, like, if you lived in New York City, part of the experience was watch Bresson. You were watching foreign films all the time, and they were if you have a really rich, like when you go to New York, whether it's museums or plays or concerts, the artistic life of a city like New York is where culture is defined, because that's where it's happening, and that's where people are going and writing about that. And I think that we don't, movies especially are not the kind of, you don't have people like Pauline Kael. There are online pundits that I've read that are good. Like, I'll tell you something. I have one of my favorite movie blogs is Mr. Sardine's. Let me get this. Mr. Peel's Sardine Liqueur. Let me get it right. I always get it wrong. Let's see. Hang on. I'm going to give you, because Okay, it is Mr. Peel's Sardine Liqueur. Okay, one of my favorite movie columns on the web. It's written by my friend Peter Avellino, and if you've never gone to his you just got to read this. I'm going to put this in the live chat. Go to his, you'll lose hours. And he writes about film. It's almost like he's out of time. I feel like he should have been alive writing about film in the 60s. And the way he writes about film is he talks about them in relation to himself. And all you have to do is start reading one of his columns, and you'll get it. You'll get it. But I just feel that films, like everybody likes movies now. Yeah, we all like movies. We live in the post-home video era. And I just think the way that people look upon movies now, movies are mainstream. You know, movies have gone, not that they weren't always mainstream, but now movies, you had to go to the movie theater. They were events. Now people are watching movies and TV all the time. And I just think their cultural, what they mean to our culture is different than what they used to. So I don't think it's a stupid comment that you made, but I just think the times are changing. But I think that these directors will be, they will be remembered. These directors will be remembered. And by the way, Omar94 goes on and says, Rob, since it seems like you have seen almost every movie. Oh, I have not. Let me ask. When talking about Woody Allen, most people always think of Annie Hall and Manhattan. Those who have seen Woody Allen movies probably know more than those two, like Midnight in Paris, Blue Jasmine, or Hannah and Her Sisters. But one movie of his that I really like and think is underappreciated is The Purple Rose of Cairo with Mia Farrow, Jeff Daniels, and Danny Aiello. It's about a character who comes off the big screen and into the real world. I just wanted to know if you've seen it and if you liked it. Allen himself considers it one of the 3 best movies he's ever made, the other 2 being Stardust Memories and Match Point. Thanks, live long and prosper. I love Purple Rose of Cairo. I want what happened this week to happen, or I want what happened last week to happen this week. Otherwise, what's life all about? I love Purple Rose of Cairo. I mean, again, Purple Rose of Cairo is a movie about movies. It's a delightful, and it's also a great fantasy story. I really enjoy that movie. I think it's great. I'm a huge Woody Allen fan. I can't wait to read it. I do not have his autobiography yet. I can't wait to read it. I'm a huge fan of him, and I have always been a huge fan of him. And he consistently, now he's making movies and we can't even see them. His last 2 movies are not, haven't come out in America because of, by the way, these allegations that I do not believe. And if you read what Moses Farrow has said, Mia Farrow's son, and he was exonerated by 2 different states. But again, who knows? But after reading all of the evidence, there's no evidence to support, or reading all the findings and hearing from Moses Farrow, it's tough. Look, it's a tough thing all the way around. But Woody Allen, I'm a huge fan of his, and how many people have made consistently a movie a year, which is incredible. But Purple Rose of Cairo is a wonderful, wonderful movie. It's interesting. Does he say that in his autobiography? I love Stardust Memories. Stardust Memories is it's one of my favorite, again, my favorite movies about what it's like to be a filmmaker. Like La Dolce Vita or something. Oh my God, I do love those movies. Because I think they're very, very good. Omar was flooding me with letters. He asked me a bunch of stuff. So, Jacob Fudge sends me another letter. Now, Jacob Fudge is one of the members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. He started his own comic book store, and we've been talking about comic book stores, and he wrote me another letter. So here's from Jacob Fudge. Salam and good evening, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. I've always wanted to use that greeting from the opening of Aladdin. It has been a hectic and busy week, to say the least. So I do apologize for the delayed response to your reading my letter on air, although I suspect you don't take offense. No. First off, thank you, Rob. If I wasn't so exhausted, I would shower you with praise and gratitude for all the kind words and good laughs you provided me whilst reading my letter. But as you didn't mean to kiss my ass, I won't go too far out of my way to kiss yours. Just know it was very much appreciated. The other thing I wanted to make sure I hit before going any further was another thank you to a couple of members of the Post-Geek Singularity. First, Paul from Long Beach, who generously sent me $5 over PayPal without asking for anything in return Just a message saying, on the show, I'm Paul C. from Long Beach. I created the 3-word review, and Rob has read my letters on multiple occasions. I'm going to promote this type of action in the chat room tomorrow and for future shows. The Post-Geek Singularity will help. This is just badass. Nothing more I can say other than the sincerest of thank yous to Paul, and you're a badass imagination connoisseur. Plus, Sublime is one of my all-time favorite bands, and the LBC will always have a special place in my heart. The other thank you I want to give a quick shout out to is to Jack Knight 7373, Throg Frog of Thunder, who reached out to me via email asking about items he can buy from the shop. He has not replied back just yet, but if he hears this, I hope he does, and hopefully I can send him some good trade paperbacks he has yet to read. Without Robservations, neither of these guys would have known about my shop or reached out, so thanks again to this community. I can reaffirm it is the best community on the YouTubes. Now on to the status update, Captain Kirk. When I wrote my initial letter, waxing nostalgic about what it took to open the shop, Diamond had not yet announced they were ceasing all future shipments yet. That's why, dude, from the bottom of my heart, when I read that they were ceasing shipments, my first thing I thought about was you and your store, because we hadn't got that yet. And I'm like, oh my God. I was pissed for you. That is quite a blow to the shop's kneecaps, as I was just putting in place alternative methods of getting people their weekly comics. You put up a picture of you delivering comics to somebody yourself with gloves on, and I couldn't believe it. That was quite a blow to the shop's kneecaps, as I was putting in place alternative methods of getting people their weekly comics. So since Tuesday, I have done nothing but drive around southeast Indiana and southwest Ohio delivering people their pull lists to their doors. Since my employee Josh, who I raved about in the last letter, has seemingly grown paranoid about the epidemic, refuses to leave his house, I have once again become a one-man operation, just like the beginning of Comic Relief, my store. In some ways, this has been frustrating. In others, it's kind of nice to make my own schedule and have nothing on but the radio. Kind of like I'm a certain customer I delivered to when she answered the door, I joke. When else am I going to get a chance to use that Shane Black line? Shout out to Gay Perry from Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. But here are some stats for you. This week's shipment alone cost me $1,160. Fairly small compared to some shops I know. But that is a decent chunk of change to evaporate from the bank account the same week bills are due and is the payroll. So I knew I had to do something to recoup that sweet, sweet cheddar. I offered my customers the chance to get their comics. I've delivered them sales tax free and with their 10% pull list discount completely intact. You may have the best community on the internet, Rob, but I believe I have the best community of comic shop going customers in all of geekdom. I had so many of my customers take me up on this offer that it has taken until 4 p.m. today, Friday, to fill them all and get them dropped off. Some customers paid extra just to be nice. Some tried tipping me or offering gas money, all of which I declined. Some offered me a beverage or a snack for the road. I did take up those offers, but all of them gave me a smile and a big thank you. Almost every single one of them thanked me and told me that if they could do anything else to help, to please let them know. And these didn't feel like your typical hollow thoughts and prayers sentiments. They felt sincere, and many of them I know I can take up on those offers if need be. From Tuesday to Friday, I have put over 500 miles on my car's odometer and made 3 trips to the bank to deposit cash, 2 trips to the post office, and honestly countless door-to-door deliveries spanning 5 counties and 8 different cities. I was able to see some customers who I haven't been able to see in quite some time since I took my other job. I saw where they lived. I talked with them outside the dynamics of business owner and customer, and all the while I felt an overwhelming feeling of support and gratitude. Like all of my customers, came together and rallied behind my little novelty shop to make sure the pillars stand strong. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life, and made the long drives worth it. So as of now, I've made over $2,000 back from delivering comics door to door. So I will not be put into a hole this week, financially anyway. That feels nice. A fun little side bit. On Tuesday, when I was doing some of my last deliveries for the day, I popped on Robservations. And that was when I heard you reading my letter on the air. It was a nice reminder of why I was doing what I was doing, as I was feeling a bit angry having to do it myself. But your kind words changed my perspective, and I don't think I would have rather done it any other way. The same way I opened the shop. A bit of clarity may be needed as well. I've gotten a couple people asking me about the timeline of me opening my shop in 2017 and you saying I opened my shop last year. So to set the record straight for some listeners and those who have asked, this is what I thought. I opened the shop in January of 2017. In June of 2019, I completely relocated the shop. That was my understanding. You know what? I've never really made that clear. I understood that you were moving into a new shop when people first started writing me about you and first heard about you. That's how I always thought about it, is that you moved. In June of 19, I completely relocated the shop. That was when I was writing in, as well as a couple of friends, about the trials of getting it ready to open. We faced quite a few ridiculous hurdles that made it extremely difficult to open back up. And for all intents and purposes, it was basically opening up a new shop. Same name, but a nice facelift in a different part of town. Hope that clarifies some things for those who have asked. Yeah, I was wondering about that, but I was just under the impression you were reopening a shop. Now it seems like every day I wake up and there is more detrimental news that completely takes the wind out of my sails. Yes, your newest episode about comics going digital for the foreseeable future has become the latest rancor of the comic peddling community. I feel like Luke Skywalker trapped in the Wampa's cave, disoriented and confused. Then I see my lightsaber and reach for it, a glimmer of hope, but the Force basically tells me to fuck off. I'm not worthy, and I'm left for dead, hanging upside down, undignified. As a community, we've really come together. I've honestly seen nothing like it. I was invited by my good friend Christy Blanche of Aw Yeah Comics in Muncie, Indiana, to a Facebook page where owners, artists, writers, and creators are all banding together to propose some alternatives and solutions during this time. All of us refusing to let physical copies of comics die. It has been quite a sight to see. I feel honored to be a part of it, honestly. Some of the creators I've been able to interact with are artists like Arthur Adams and Tony Daniel, among other great indie creators. Man, I'm a huge Arthur Adams fan, so don't cry for us just yet. But know if publishers decide to break rank and trudge on ahead with digital copies while their frontline soldiers are left out to dry, it could be all over for hard copy comics as we know it. Let's see which publisher is the little boy to take his finger out of the dike first, or if they will remain steadfast and honor us meager peddlers. I don't mean to end this on an ominous note, and it shouldn't be taken as such. As of now, that is just where I am left with it. I can keep everyone updated as things go along, but with the advent of this newfangled thing you call the internet, I suspect you'll know sooner or as soon as I do. In the meantime, I am brainstorming new ways to promote business, like online sales. It's the internet, duh. Small Facebook Live auctions, incentives to look for back issues and older stock, as well as converting the backspace of my storefront into something that will generate revenue for the foreseeable future in tabletop gaming. Thanks to everyone who has supported me and Comic Relief. I hope to hear more from you. Doesn't just have to be monetary donations. Kind words and good ideas are always welcome. Rob, when the dust starts settling, we can bat around some ideas on how we can benefit from your 75 long boxes as well. Until then, as the big guy always says, everyone has a story to tell. All you have to do is listen. Thank you, Gladiator of Geekdom. That dude, Jacob Fudge. P.S. Of course, I'd be honored to be the official comic shop of Robservations. Hang that shit on me, son. Well, Jacob, you are. Your Comic Relief is the first official comic book store in the Burnettwork network of comic book stores, and we'll see what we can do to make sure that the industry does not die. You know, a friend of mine, my friend David Irwin, just took over as the publisher of Heavy Metal. And Heavy Metal is one of the obviously comic book stores is where it sells. I mean, I know it sells on magazine racks as well, but I mean, he was really excited about that. And of course, their print edition is the big. You gotta have that. And I don't know, man. I don't know what he's gonna do. But anyway, yeah. Let's see. Alexander Wilson sends in another super chat. Alexander, you've been very generous. Thank you so much. Major League Baseball created BAMTech to stream their games in 2003 that created modern-day streaming. Disney buys BAMTech, who created Disney Plus. Major League Baseball knew streaming was the future before Hollywood. Man, I did not know that either. That's fascinating. Oh, now I got to read up on BAMTech. Wow. That's really interesting, Alexander. You must be do you go by Alex? I like Alexander. It's great. But this is how fascinating. The founder 865 says, "Thanks for your answer. Picard fails in 10 hours to deliver one story. TNG could tell one story in 42 minutes. Too much of nothing going on in Picard, or I would say there's too much of a bunch of different stuff going in a million different ways. I don't know. So yeah, I mean that was not not the greatest thing in the world. I've been going for 2.5 hours. I think I'm going to stop here. I've got many more letters to read. If you've sent me a letter recently in the last couple days, I obviously haven't got to them all. There's a lot more that I will read. I will obviously be back here tomorrow. I want to thank everybody for all the amazing support that you've been showing me, both on whether it's super chats or tips. Of course, those are always appreciated, especially now when we've gone from a 2-income family to a 1-income family. So it's very helpful. But just the letters and the comments and everything that you guys have been, and girls and gentle beings and people from across the 28 known galaxies, all the things that, you've been very supportive of this channel. Cause like today, I was frustrated that I didn't have anything I wanted to talk about because there's no new news. And I'm like, maybe I'll just sit here and build a model, unbox toys I have unboxed but set up speak. I don't know. I wasn't even going to go on today, but I was like, people keep writing me and telling me, thank you for going on. And people have said even in this chat today that they appreciate that. So, I can't thank you guys enough for being here. And I guess I'll keep broadcasting since you guys are still here. All of you are still here. It's great to have this community, and thank you, because it is weird, it is strange, and I think everybody's kind of waiting. We don't really know, and you watch the numbers increasing, and no one is flattening out yet. No curves have been flattened out, but yeah. I mean, all we can do is keep taking care of each other and watching out for one another, watching out for ourselves. And, yeah. I also want to thank Mayor Mike Bodden, who makes sure I get these letters to read. I want to thank, of course, Detective Jim Boyers and Greg Smith and Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons for being our great moderating staff and giving of their time to be here and to moderate these chats like they do. By the way, Casanova Frankenstein sent in a super chat and says I didn't see his last chat. He is correct. Casanova Frankenstein says, The Naked Director is a Japanese Netflix original show set in 80s Japan based on the true story of an adult video director. That's awesome. I think you would enjoy it. I am so watching that. It's a Netflix original set in the 80s in Japan. Oh, I'm so down. I will totally watch that. Yes. Well, Casanova Frankenstein, I will, it's funny. I guess I have to watch Mystery Men again. But I thank you for that. But anyway, I was just saying that I want to thank everybody for everything they do on this channel. I can take off these glasses now because with the headphones on, I can't do the CSI Miami or the Oscar Goldman. But again, I want to thank everybody. Like I said, I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity for keeping the show on the air, keeping me here and keeping me excited, keeping me engaged. And I also would suggest there's a lot of really great other YouTubers out there putting good content out. Like I said, Gem Mint, who basically collects statues. He does great statue reviews, comic reviews, and he collects omnibuses. He did a great video today showing his collection in his man cave. Mariana Impression Blend, if you haven't watched hers channel, she has great lists of movies, but she also covers science fiction novels and things like that. So books, she's literary minded. There's a funny guy I watch, the Stradman. He's like some, early 20s kid that owns supercars, $200,000 supercars. He's just the most enthusiastic person on YouTube. I would be if I had his cars, but I just watch him, and I don't know anything about the YouTube luxury car or yacht channels, but when they pop up, I like watching the Stradman just because he's the Stradman. I don't care what he's talking about. He gets as excited about life as I do, so it's fun to watch him. Of course, Midnight's Edge, I do watch a lot of their channel. Look, their deep dive, like watch Andre's dive into Dune, which I think is good. Ideas of Ice and Fire is another YouTube channel that I like to jump into. They cover, again, a lot of literary stuff. I really enjoy that. I like Chris Stuckman's channel. I watch a lot of his reviews, and his hilariosity stuff is hysterical. And just off the top of my head, those are some YouTube channels that I enjoy, and I think you guys might too. And also love The Critical Drinker. The Critical Drinker, he just put up a piece not just on Star Trek Picard, but an appreciation and review of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. And again, The Critical Drinker, I really appreciate his take. I think for his persona, which is funny, I think he has a very, very astute and pretty insightfully accurate assessment of these kinds of films. And I don't always agree. I think I'd like to see Critical Drinker go back and take a look at some older movies. But I do really like his channel, and I really enjoy his content. So check that out. I mean, I know a lot of YouTubers are out there. They're making new content during these difficult times. And another guy that's completely off the wall that I talk about that I don't know if anyone has watched is Davey504. I just find his humor funny. Maybe he's not to your taste, but he is a very tall Italian man who loves the bass guitar. He loves the bass. That's his favorite thing, and his channel is just about his love of the bass. And I think he's very funny, and sometimes his shtick might get a little old, but I really enjoy his shtick, and just somebody I like. So check out Davey 5. I'm sorry, I was about to sneeze, but I didn't. So anyway, I'm going to bring an end to this chat, and remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, yes, I'll be back tomorrow, but for the rest of today, have a better day. And I mean that.